She is completely unstable and incapable of managing her own life. My father Marcus screamed those words across the mahogany tables of the county courthouse. His face was purple with blind rage. I sat quietly next to my defense lawyer. I did not flinch. I did not cry. I just gently tapped my diamond tennis bracelet against the heavy wooden table. The judge slammed his wooden gavel down hard enough to echo through the high vaulted ceiling. He leaned forward and stared directly at my father. "Do you seriously not recognize her?" the judge asked aloud. My father blinked twice. His expensive corporate lawyer suddenly looked down at his phone and physically recoiled in absolute horror. "Excuse me." My father stammered in confusion. "My name is Maya. I am 34 years old. For most of my life, I was the ultimate family disappointment. The college dropout who never quite measured up to the impossible standards set by my narcissistic father and his golden child, my younger sister Chloe. But what they did not know was that while they spent years looking down on me, I was quietly building a massive financial empire in the shadows. Before I continue with this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to smile through the disrespect of toxic people who thought they were better than you. Trust me, you will want to hear how this epic courtroom showdown ends. The path to that dramatic courtroom moment began exactly 3 weeks earlier at our annual Family Sunday cookout. The late July heat was absolutely suffocating in Atlanta, but it was nothing compared to the suffocating atmosphere of my own toxic family gatherings. I only attended these rare events to honor the memory of my late grandmother, who always loved having the family together. I was sitting quietly on a cheap, folding lawn chair, holding a paper plate of potato salad, when a dark shadow fell over me. It was Preston. My sister married him. Preston was a tall, wealthy white man who had married into our black family 5 years ago and immediately decided he was the smartest person in any room. He came from generational wealth and loved to remind everyone about it constantly. He handed me a very cheap, lukewarm beer and then smirked down at me. "Hey, Maya," Preston said loudly, ensuring the uncles and aunts nearby could hear his booming voice. "Chloe was telling me you are still struggling to find your footing in the real world. You know my commercial real estate firm is booming right now. We actually need a new receptionist to handle the overflow calls. It pays $15 an hour. I know you dropped out of college, so your options are incredibly limited, but I figured doing a favor for family is the right thing to do." The crowded yard grew perfectly quiet. My older aunts exchanged quiet, knowing glances. Chloe stood a few feet away, sipping a cold mimosa with a smug smile on her perfect face. She absolutely loved watching her husband belittle me in public. It was truly their favorite couple's activity. I looked at the cheap beer in Preston and his outstretched hand. I did not take it. I just offered him a polite, fake closed-mouth smile. "I appreciate the thought, Preston, but I am doing just fine," I said evenly and calmly. "I really do not need a job." Preston rolled his blue eyes and let out a very loud and heavy condescending sigh. "Right. Doing just fine. Living in that run-down old house your grandmother left you? You are 34, Maya. Foolish pride does not pay the monthly light bill." Before I could respond to his insult, the loud clinking of a metal spoon against a crystal glass drew everyone and their attention. My father Marcus stood at the center of the brick patio, holding a glass of expensive bourbon. He wore his tailored white linen shirt and the strict authoritative expression he used to control our entire family for decades. "Listen up, everyone," my father announced loudly and clearly while projecting his deep voice over the low hum of the outdoor patio speakers. "Since we are all gathered here today, I want to make a special toast to family, stepping up when it really counts. As you all know, Preston and Chloe are expanding their massive investment portfolio and bringing real pride to this family name. To secure their next big commercial building project, they need a little bit more leverage." My father turned his sharp gaze directly toward me. His dark eyes were incredibly cold and highly calculating. "So tomorrow morning, Maya will be signing over the legal deed entirely to your grandmother and her house to Preston. My father continued acting as if this was already a finalized done deal. Preston is going to use the property as collateral to secure the new business loan from the bank. It is the very least Maya can do to finally contribute to the family legacy, since Preston has been so generous in offering her stable employment. Let us all raise a glass to family unity and shared success. Every single eye in the crowded backyard turned to look at me. They fully expected me to simply lower my head and crumble. I carefully set my paper plate down on the small patio table. I stood up tall and smoothed the front of my sundress. The silence in the yard was absolute. I looked directly into my father and his arrogant eyes. "No, I will not," I said. My voice carried clearly across the lawn. My father dropped his confident smile. "What did you say?" I said no. I will not sign over my house to Preston today, or any other day. The house belongs to me. It is not available for collateral. I turned around and walked away. War had begun. The second those words left my mouth, the entire backyard erupted into absolute chaos. Gasps echoed over the patio speakers. My aunts began whispering furiously to one another. I did not wait for my father to recover from his shock. I kept walking directly toward the side gate. I had only made it a few steps before I heard the frantic clicking of designer heels rushing across the concrete right behind me. It was Chloe. She grabbed my shoulder and spun me around with a vicious yank. Her perfect smile was completely gone, replaced by a contorted mask of pure rage. "You selfish little witch," Chloe screamed at the top of her lungs. "You are really going to stand here and disrespect Dad after everything he does for this family? You know damn well Grandma was completely senile when she changed that will. You manipulated a sick old woman just so you could finally have something of your own. You stole that house from us." I looked down at her hand, grabbing my shoulder, and then looked right into her furious eyes. "Let go of me, Chloe," I said with a terrifying calmness that made her flinch. "I did not manipulate anyone. Grandma left me the house because she knew I was the only person in this family who would not instantly sell it to buy another ugly sports car." Chloe gasped and yanked her hand back as if I had burned her. Before she could scream again, a heavy hand slammed into the wooden fence right next to my head. It was my father. He had crossed the yard in seconds, and now he was physically cornering me against the side of the house. His chest was heaving and his eyes were burning with a dark, controlling fury I had seen many times before. "Listen to me very carefully, Maya," my father growled in a low, menacing tone, meant only for me. "You are going to sign that deed tomorrow morning, or I swear to God I will destroy you completely. I will make sure you have absolutely nothing left in this world. You are a failure who brings nothing but embarrassment to my name. You owe us this." I felt a familiar tightness in my chest, but I refused to let him see me break. "I owe you nothing," I fired back, keeping my voice steady and cold. "You never supported me. You threw away $200,000 on a luxury wedding for Chloe. You handed Preston a massive check to start his real estate firm just because he asked. But when I needed a simple co-signature for my first cramped apartment, after I left college, you laughed in my face. You told me I was a bad investment. You told me I would never amount to anything. So do not stand here and act like I owe this family a single dime." My father leaned in closer until I could smell the expensive bourbon on his breath. "You were a bad investment." He spat the words out like poison. "You still are. Chloe has a real future. Preston is building an empire. You are just a bitter dropout living in a rundown shack. If you think I am going to let a stubborn, ungrateful brat ruin a multi-million-dollar deal for my real estate firm, you are completely out of your mind. I will take that house from you, Maya. I will drag you through the mud to get it." I stared right back at him, feeling nothing but a deep, frozen resolve. "Good luck with that, Marcus," I said, deliberately using his first name. I pushed past him, ignoring the shocked gasps from the aunts who had gathered near the porch to eavesdrop. I walked straight down the driveway toward my car. My heart was pounding, but my hands were completely steady. I unlocked my door and slid into the driver's seat. Before I could start the engine, Preston stepped right in front of my car. He crossed his arms over his chest and planted his feet firmly on the concrete, blocking my only exit. His face was flushed red with anger, and his typical arrogant smirk was completely gone. He marched over to my driver's side window and slammed his hand against the glass. "Roll it down, Maya," Preston demanded loudly. I rolled the window down just a few inches. Preston leaned down so his face was inches from the glass. "You think you are so smart," Preston sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. "You think you can just say no and walk away from us. You are messing with the wrong people. I have the best and most expensive corporate lawyers in the entire city on my payroll. My firm has resources you cannot even begin to comprehend. We will sue you for everything you have. We will claim Grandma was mentally unfit. We will drag you into court and bury you in so much legal debt you will be begging us to take that worthless house off your hands. You are a nobody, Maya. You have zero power here. Give it up before you lose the only pathetic thing you actually own." I looked at Preston. I noticed the slight nervous twitch in his jaw. He was trying to sound intimidating, but I could smell the pure desperation rolling off him. He needed this collateral desperately. His booming real estate firm was clearly a hollow shell. I smiled at him. It was a genuine, bright smile. I rolled up my window right in the middle of his next sentence. I shifted my car into reverse and slammed my foot on the gas pedal. The tires screeched loudly against the concrete. Preston yelled in panic and leaped backwards, stumbling awkwardly into the rose bushes to avoid getting his knees completely shattered by my front bumper. I backed out of the driveway perfectly, leaving them all standing blindly in the thick dust. The next morning was Sunday. I woke up early and carefully pressed a tailored navy blue dress. My grandmother always loved seeing me dress nicely for Sunday service at First Zion Baptist Church. It was the absolute heart of our local community. For 3 generations, my family had occupied the exact same 3 pews right near the front. I knew that walking through those heavy oak doors today would be like stepping directly into a lion den. But I completely refused to hide in my own home. I drove to the church and parked my car. When I walked into the sanctuary, the choir was already singing a joyful hymn. I kept my head held high and walked straight down the center aisle. I took my usual seat in the 3rd row. I could feel the immediate shift in the energy around me. My father Marcus and my sister Chloe were sitting just 1 pew ahead of me. Chloe stiffened when she saw me. My father did not even turn around, but I saw his broad shoulders tense beneath his suit. They clearly did not expect me to show my face in public after the explosive confrontation at the cookout yesterday. The service proceeded normally for the first hour. I focused on the music and ignored the occasional hostile glares from my aunts sitting across the aisle. Then Pastor Davis stepped up to the massive wooden pulpit. The sanctuary grew very quiet. Pastor Davis was a man who usually commanded deep respect, but he was also a man who heavily relied on the generous financial donations my father provided to the church building fund. I watched my father give the pastor a slow, deliberate nod. Pastor Davis cleared his throat and looked down at his notes. His expression was incredibly solemn. "Brothers and sisters, we need to take a special moment this morning to pray for one of our own," Pastor Davis said, his voice echoing through the large room. "The devil works hard to divide our families. He uses greed and mental confusion to pull our loved ones away from the righteous path." My father bowed his head, acting like a heartbroken parent carrying a heavy burden. Chloe pulled a lace handkerchief from her designer purse and began dabbing at her perfectly dry eyes. "We need to lift up the Marcus family in their time of great distress." Pastor Davis continued, looking directly at the congregation. "Specifically, we need to pray for Maya. We pray that the Lord heals her mind from this tragic mental breakdown. We pray that He removes the deep greed and terrible selfishness that has clouded her judgment and caused so much pain to her loving father and sister." The absolute silence in the massive room was deafening. Over 500 heads slowly turned to look directly at me sitting there in the 3rd row. The whispers started almost instantly. It sounded like a swarm of angry bees buzzing through the wooden pews. I saw women I had known since childhood shaking their heads in deep pity and absolute disgust. I saw the senior deacons exchanging highly judgmental looks. My father had orchestrated this entire public humiliation. He had weaponized our church community against me. He hijacked a sacred space just to break my spirit. He wanted me to feel so deeply isolated and completely ashamed that I would run out of the building in tears and surrender the house deed to him by nightfall. That was his predictable playbook. He always used public shame to control us. Chloe turned her head slightly to look at me over her shoulder. She had a vicious, triumphant smirk playing on her painted lips. She fully expected me to crack under the heavy pressure. Instead, I took a slow, deep breath. I did not cry. I did not look away. I waited calmly as the head usher walked down the aisle, carrying the heavy brass offering plate. When the usher reached my row, I stood up slowly and deliberately. The buzzing whispers abruptly stopped. The entire congregation held its collective breath, waiting for me to cause a massive scene or run away weeping. I reached into my small leather purse and pulled out a crisp $100 bill. I held it up for just a second, making sure my father and the pastor could see it clearly. Then I dropped the bill directly into the brass offering plate. It made a soft but distinct sound in the dead quiet church. "Keep the change, Pastor," I said clearly and calmly. I smoothed the front of my navy blue dress, picked up my purse, and stepped out of the pew. I walked right past my father. He was staring at me with pure shock. He could not comprehend why his ultimate weapon of public humiliation had absolutely no effect on my demeanor. I walked straight down the center aisle with my head held high and my spine perfectly straight. I did not rush. I took my time, showing every single person in that room that I was completely unbothered by their false prayers and manufactured gossip. I pushed open the heavy oak doors and stepped out into the blinding Sunday morning sunlight. The thick, humid air hit me instantly, but I felt incredibly light. I walked across the large asphalt parking lot toward my car. The lot was completely empty except for one person. Preston was leaning casually against the driver's side door of my sedan. He was wearing an expensive gray suit with no tie. His arms were crossed over his chest, and he had that same infuriating, arrogant smirk on his face. He had clearly skipped the church service to wait out here and ambush me when I finally fled the building. "You just could not take the hint, could you, Maya?" Preston said as I walked closer. "Did you really enjoy having the whole town pray for your broken mind?" I stopped a few feet away from him. "Move away from my car, Preston," I said coldly. He chuckled and shook his head. He did not move an inch. "You do not get to give orders anymore, Maya." Preston sneered, taking a deliberate step toward me. "I told you yesterday I was not playing around. You thought you won because you drove away from the cookout. But while you were sitting in there getting publicly embarrassed by your own pastor, I was making real moves. I filed a legal lien against your house early this morning." I looked at him, feeling a sudden surge of cold, calculated anger. "You cannot file a lien on a property you have no claim to," I said, keeping my voice entirely even. "Watch me." Preston replied, his voice dripping with absolute malice. "I used my top corporate lawyers. We filed a dispute claiming your grandmother owed my firm a massive debt for property renovations before she died. It is a complete lie, of course, but the county clerk does not know that. That house is locked down, Maya. You cannot sell it. You cannot borrow against it. It is practically mine already." He leaned in close, his blue eyes cold and lifeless. "You do not belong in this family, Maya. You are a weak, pathetic liability. Give up now before we take the rest of your worthless life apart, piece by piece." I stared right back at him. He thought his wealth and his connections made him invincible against a woman he deemed totally inferior. "You filed a fraudulent lien against my property using your corporate resources," I asked calmly, ensuring I mentally recorded his exact admission. "Yes, I did." Preston laughed, entirely too confident in his own supposed superiority. "And there is absolutely nothing you can do about it. You do not have the money to fight my lawyers in court. Now hand over the keys and the deed, or tomorrow morning things are going to get much worse for you." I gripped my purse handle tightly. "Get off my car, Preston." I said it with such sudden dark intensity that his arrogant smile finally faltered. He stepped back nervously, brushing invisible dust off his suit jacket. "Think about it, Maya," he called out as I unlocked my door. I slid into the driver's seat and started the engine. I did not need to think about anything. Preston had just handed me the exact weapon I needed to eventually destroy him. I walked to my bedroom window. Below me in the backyard, an unauthorized demolition crew was systematically destroying my late grandmother and her beautiful wrap-around porch. That porch was where she taught me to read. It held decades of precious family memories. Now 6 men in dirty work boots were ripping up the mahogany floorboards with heavy metal crowbars. A yellow dump truck was parked on my lawn, crushing the rose bushes she planted 30 years ago. The mechanical roar of the saws vibrated through the glass of my window. I did not scream. I did not rush downstairs in my pajamas to beg them to stop. That is exactly what Preston wanted me to do. He wanted me to feel utterly helpless and hysterical. He wanted to break my spirit early in the morning so I would surrender by noon. Instead, I calmly walked over to my nightstand and picked up my phone. I opened the camera app and switched it to high-definition video mode. I stood by the window recording every single detail. I zoomed in on the license plate of their unmarked dump truck. I recorded the faces of the men swinging sledgehammers. I watched as one of the foremen nailed a cheap plastic sign to the side of my house. It read, "Preliminary renovations, authorized by Preston Real Estate Holdings." It was a completely illegal move. Preston was trying to establish physical dominance over the property to force me out. He assumed I was too poor to hire a lawyer and too intimidated to fight back. He assumed wrong. I stopped recording after I had 5 solid minutes of crystal clear evidence. Then I opened my contacts and dialed a number I rarely used. It was not the emergency dispatch line. It was a direct private cell phone number for the chief of police. The phone rang twice before a deep voice answered. "Good morning, Chief," I said, keeping my tone conversational and light. "Maya," Chief Robert Hayes replied, sounding pleasantly surprised. "It is exceptionally good to hear from you. The City Council is still talking about that massive anonymous donation your holding company made to the new Youth Recreation Center. You single-handedly saved that community project. How can I help you today?" "Robert, I have a slight problem," I said, pouring myself a glass of water from the crystal pitcher on my dresser. "There is a rogue demolition crew currently destroying my back porch. They claim to be authorized by a man named Preston, who falsely believes he owns my property. Send me the exact address, Maya." Robert said, his voice instantly shifting from friendly to strictly professional. I gave him the address. "I will have my best units there in under 5 minutes," he promised. "Do not engage with them and stay safely inside." I hung up the phone and walked into my master bathroom to wash my face and brush my teeth. I took my absolute time. I applied my daily moisturizer and put on a pair of comfortable linen slacks and a silk blouse. By the time I walked downstairs to my kitchen, the loud roaring of the chainsaws had abruptly stopped. They were replaced by the heavy slamming of car doors and the sharp crackle of police radios. I poured myself a cup of dark roast coffee and walked out my back door. 4 police cruisers with their blue lights flashing were parked haphazardly across my driveway and front lawn, blocking the dump truck from leaving. 7 heavily armed uniformed officers had already swarmed the backyard. The demolition workers were sitting on the grass with their hands on their heads, looking incredibly nervous. Just as I took my first sip of coffee, a shiny black Range Rover sped down the street and screeched to a halt behind the police cruisers. Preston jumped out of the driver's seat looking frantic. He was wearing his expensive golf clothes, looking like he had just stepped off a private country club green. He plastered on his most charming, arrogant smile and marched right up to the commanding officer. "Gentlemen, there is no need for this kind of commotion," Preston said loudly, using his absolute best wealthy white man voice. He fully expected the officers to immediately defer to him based on his skin color and expensive vehicle. "I am Preston. I am the new owner of this property. This is just a simple family misunderstanding. My sister-in-law is a bit mentally unstable, and she is having a very hard time letting go of the house. You guys can pack up and leave now. I have it completely under control. The commanding officer, a tall, broad-shouldered man, did not smile back. He looked at Preston and then looked over at me standing peacefully on my ruined porch with my coffee mug. "Ma'am, did you authorize this construction crew?" the officer asked me loudly. "Absolutely not, officer," I replied clearly. "This man is trespassing and he brought an unauthorized crew to vandalize my home." Preston rolled his eyes and let out a loud, exasperated laugh. "Come on, guys," he said, stepping closer to the officer, trying to act like they were old friends. "Do I really look like a criminal vandal to you? I am a prominent local real estate developer. I filed a legal lien on this property just yesterday. It basically belongs to me." The officer pulled out his small black notepad. "A lien is not a deed, sir. Do you have a legal deed to this property with your name on it right now?" Preston scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. "I will have it by the end of the week." The officer snapped his notepad shut. "Then you are trespassing. Turn around and put your hands behind your back." Preston froze completely. His arrogant, confident smile completely vanished. "Excuse me," he stammered in shock. "I said, put your hands behind your back," the officer repeated, stepping forward and grabbing Preston by his arm. "You are under arrest for trespassing and felony property damage." Preston began to struggle wildly, his face turning bright red as the cold steel handcuffs clicked tightly around his wrists. He screamed for his lawyer, but nobody was listening to him anymore. Preston was hauled away in the back of the police cruiser, his expensive golf clothes pressed against the hard plastic seat. I watched the squad cars pull away from my ruined lawn, took another sip of my coffee, and went back inside to start my workday. I needed to maintain the carefully crafted illusion I had built for my family. For the past 5 years, my father and sister firmly believed I worked as a low-level data entry clerk at a dingy tax preparation office called Jackson Tax Solutions, located in a rundown strip mall across town. I actually rented a small desk in the back of that office specifically for the rare occasions my family decided to ambush me at work. The owner of the tax office was a dear friend who happily played along with my charade in exchange for me secretly handling his commercial real estate investments through my holding company. By 2 in the afternoon, I was sitting at that cheap particle board desk typing on an old laptop. The bell above the glass front door violently jingled. I did not even need to look up to know who it was. Chloe stormed into the small office like a hurricane in designer heels. Her perfect blonde hair was uncharacteristically messy, and her mascara was slightly smudged. She had just spent the last 6 hours sitting in a cold, sterile police precinct, waiting to post a $10,000 cash bail for her arrogant husband. She was breathing heavily, her hands clenched into tight fists. She spotted me in the back corner and marched straight down the narrow aisle of cubicles, ignoring the startled looks from the actual accountants working nearby. In her right hand, she carried a large hot latte from an expensive coffee shop. "You vicious, jealous spinster!" Chloe screamed the second she reached my desk. Her voice was shrill and echoing loudly off the cheap drop ceiling tiles. "You think you are so clever calling the cops on Preston. Do you have any idea how humiliating it was for him to be paraded out of that neighborhood in handcuffs? Do you know who we are? We are respectable people, Maya. You are nothing but a bitter, lonely failure who wants to drag us down to your pathetic level." I slowly took my hands off the keyboard. I looked up at her flushed face. I did not raise my voice. I did not shrink back. "Preston broke the law, Chloe," I said calmly. "He brought an unauthorized demolition crew to destroy my property. He is incredibly lucky I only pressed charges for trespassing and property damage. I could have had him held for breaking and entering." Chloe let out a loud, hysterical laugh. Her eyes were completely wild with rage. "You do not own anything!" she shrieked, slamming her free hand on my desk. "That house is ours. You are just holding on to it because you have absolutely nothing else in your miserable life. No husband, no real career, and no future. You are just completely obsessed with ruining my happiness because you know Dad loves me more. You always hated that I married a successful, wealthy man while you sit in this depressing office punching numbers for minimum wage. Before I could even formulate a response, Chloe suddenly raised her right hand and hurled the large hot latte directly across my desk. The scalding liquid splashed over my keyboard, soaked my legal pads, and splattered against my silk blouse. The hot coffee burned my chest and arms, but I refused to give her the satisfaction of crying out in pain. Gasps erupted from the other employees in the small office. The owner stood up from his desk in the front, looking ready to intervene. I held up a single hand to signal him to hold back. I calmly stood up, grabbed a handful of paper towels from a nearby wall dispenser, and began wiping the brown liquid off my face and clothes. Chloe stood there, chest heaving, looking incredibly proud of her childish tantrum. "Are you quite finished?" I asked her, my voice completely devoid of any emotion. I tossed the wet paper towels into the small plastic trash bin by my feet. I opened my bottom desk drawer, which had miraculously survived the coffee flood, and pulled out a thick, crisp manila envelope. I dropped it right in the middle of the puddle on my desk and slid it toward her. "What is this?" Chloe sneered, looking down at the envelope like it was a contagious disease. "It is a legally binding restraining order," I replied flatly. "A private courier delivered it to my desk exactly 10 minutes ago. A county judge signed it this morning immediately after your husband was booked into the jail. It explicitly states that neither you nor Preston are allowed within 500 feet of me, my home, or my place of employment. By stepping into this office and assaulting me with a hot beverage, you have already violated the terms." Chloe froze. The smug, triumphant look vanished from her face, instantly replaced by sheer panic. "You are lying," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "You cannot afford the legal filing fees to get an expedited judge signature in one morning." "I do not lie, Chloe," I said, locking my eyes directly with hers. "Frank." I called out to the building manager, who also served as the daytime security guard for the strip mall. Frank, a large, heavily built man, walked over immediately from the front lobby. "Please escort my sister out of the building," I told him. "If she refuses to leave or causes any more damage, please call the police and tell them we have a direct physical violation of an active restraining order." Frank nodded and grabbed Chloe by her upper arm. "Let us go, ma'am," he said firmly, pulling her backward. Chloe tried to yank her arm away, but Frank held on tight. As he dragged her toward the glass front door, the reality of the situation finally hit her. She realized she had lost the upper hand. She realized she could no longer physically intimidate me without severe legal consequences. She dug her designer heels into the cheap carpet and turned her head to look back at me. Her eyes were filled with a venomous, hateful glare. "You are going to pay for this, Maya," Chloe screamed at the top of her lungs as Frank pushed her through the heavy glass doors. "You think a stupid piece of paper can stop us? Dad is meeting with his lawyers right now. He is filing for a legal conservatorship. He is going to prove to a judge that you are clinically insane and take everything you have." The heavy glass doors swung shut, cutting off her frantic screaming. Frank gave me an apologetic look before returning to the front desk. My keyboard was ruined and my blouse was stained, but my mind was clear. Chloe had confirmed my worst suspicions. My father was actually going through with the conservatorship to steal my property. I packed my belongings and left early. When I pulled into my driveway that evening, a dark sedan was idling by my mailbox. A man stepped out and approached my car. When I confirmed my identity, he handed me a thick stack of legal documents. "You have been served," he said plainly before driving away. I carried the heavy stack inside and dropped it onto my kitchen counter. The header on the first page read, "Sterling and Partners." They were the most ruthless corporate law firm in the state, notorious for destroying opponents through aggressive financial intimidation. My father could never afford their exorbitant fees. Preston was clearly funding this legal assault to exact his revenge for the morning arrest. I flipped through the thick stack of papers. The sheer volume of lies was staggering. They were petitioning the court for an emergency conservatorship. They wanted to immediately freeze my bank accounts, suspend my driver license, and grant my father total legal control over my life. They attached fabricated affidavits claiming I was suffering from severe delusions and was a danger to my family assets. They were trying to completely erase my autonomy. As I read the fabricated claims, my cell phone vibrated. The caller identification displayed my father. I let it ring 3 times before I pressed accept. I did not speak. "Maya, sweetheart, are you there?" my father asked. His voice dripped with a sickening fake concern, making him sound like a grieving parent looking for sympathy. "I received your absurd legal documents, Marcus," I said, keeping my tone flat. He let out a heavy, dramatic sigh. "I know you are angry, Maya," he said softly. "I know you feel attacked, but you must understand we are doing this out of pure love. You are having a severe manic episode. Your behavior over the last 2 days has been completely erratic. You attacked Preston this morning and got him arrested. You threw coffee all over your sister today. You are not in your right mind." I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. The gaslighting was suffocating. He was completely twisting the narrative to make me look like the violent aggressor building a fake reality where he was the savior. "Preston brought an illegal demolition crew to my house," I stated firmly. "Chloe barged into my workplace and assaulted me. You are projecting their criminal behavior onto me to steal my house." "Maya, please listen to yourself," my father interrupted with a condescending edge. "You sound completely paranoid. Nobody is trying to steal from you. We just want to get you professional psychiatric help. The accounts need to be frozen so you do not do anything reckless with your limited funds. You need to stop fighting us and surrender. Once I have the conservatorship, I will make sure you are properly medicated in a quiet facility." He was threatening to lock me in a mental institution, willing to destroy my life to save his failing investments. "You will never get control over my life, Marcus," I said with absolute deadly conviction. "Oh, Maya." He chuckled a low, dark sound. "You really do not understand the power you are against. Sterling and partners never lose. They will bury you in paperwork until you cannot breathe. You have no money for a defense lawyer. You have no resources. You are completely alone. Give up now before we embarrass you in court." I did not give him the satisfaction of another response. I simply ended the call. The silence in my kitchen was heavy, but I felt no fear. I only felt a cold determination to completely crush them. They thought I was a helpless broke receptionist. They thought freezing my small checking account would leave me destitute. They had absolutely no idea who they had just declared war against. I opened a highly encrypted communication application on my phone and dialed a secure international number. A crisp, professional voice answered instantly. "Good evening, boss," the voice said respectfully. "Good evening, Julian," I replied, staring at the legal documents on my counter. "We have a slight escalation on the domestic front. My father has officially filed for a hostile conservatorship using Sterling and Partners. He intends to freeze my personal assets and seize my property." Julian let out a soft hum of amusement. "Shall I deploy the legal team to crush them immediately?" he asked. "Not yet," I said, smiling coldly. "Let them believe they have the upper hand for a little while longer. I want them to overextend themselves financially, but it is time we accelerate our timeline. What are your orders, boss?" Julian asked, shifting to pure business. "Initiate phase 2, I said, my voice hard as steel. "I want you to trace every single commercial loan my father currently holds. Find every mortgage, every line of credit, and every business debt attached to his real estate firm. Then use the Shadow Holdings account to buy all of it. I want to personally own every single piece of debt he has in this world." "Consider it done, boss," Julian replied smoothly. "It will be fully executed by early tomorrow morning." I ended the secure call and tossed my phone onto the marble kitchen counter. I poured myself a tall glass of ice-cold water and took a long, slow sip. My narcissistic father and his arrogant son-in-law Preston honestly thought they could take my grandmother and her beloved home away from me by using brute legal force. They were both about to learn a very painful permanent lesson about what real financial power actually looks like in the modern world. 2 days later, my cheap burner phone rang with a notification from the court. The judge assigned to my father and his emergency conservatorship petition had ordered a mandatory mediation session before setting a hearing date. My father was using this as a pressure tactic. He wanted to trap me in a small room with his high-priced lawyers and intimidate me into signing a settlement. I immediately agreed to attend. I went to a local discount department store and purchased an incredibly cheap, ill-fitting beige polyester suit. I paired it with scuffed flats and a worn-out tote bag. When I walked into the lavish downtown offices of Sterling and Partners later that afternoon, I looked exactly like the broke, desperate woman they believed me to be. The receptionist eyed my outfit with blatant disgust before leading me into a massive glass-walled conference room overlooking the city skyline. They were already waiting for me. My father sat at the head of the long mahogany table wearing a custom-tailored charcoal suit. Chloe was seated to his right, draped in expensive designer silk and flashing a new diamond tennis bracelet. Preston was sitting next to her, looking incredibly smug for a man who had just spent 24 hours in a holding cell. He wore a heavy gold Rolex and a crisp Tom Ford shirt perfectly pressed to hide any lingering humiliation from his recent arrest. They absolutely reeked of unearned arrogance. Seated across from them was the court-appointed mediator. He was an older, wealthy white man with a deep tan who immediately looked at me with profound pity. He clearly played golf at the same country club as Preston. "Please have a seat, Maya," the mediator said, gesturing vaguely to the stiff chair opposite the United Family front. I sat down and placed my cheap tote bag on the polished table. The mediator steepled his fingers and adopted a patronizing tone. "We are here today to resolve this unfortunate family dispute without taking up any more of the court schedule. Maya, your father, has presented highly compelling evidence regarding your recent erratic behavior. Throwing hot beverages, calling the police on your own brother-in-law, and refusing to communicate reasonably. These are all signs of a severe mental health crisis." I looked at my father. He gave me a sad, deeply fake smile. "We just want you to get better, sweetheart." My father lied smoothly. "We are willing to drop the conservatorship petition completely if you just sign the property deed over to Preston today. We can use the funds to check you into a premium wellness center. You need rest, not responsibilities." The mediator nodded in solemn agreement. "It is an incredibly generous offer, Maya," the mediator added. "Preston is even willing to forgive the false arrest if you write him a formal apology right now. The alternative is a protracted legal battle that you simply cannot afford. You will end up bankrupt and institutionalized. Just sign the papers and let your family take care of you." Preston leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. He smirked at me. "You heard the man, Maya. Give me the deed and say you are sorry. It is over." I kept my posture slightly hunched, playing the part of the defeated victim perfectly. I reached out and pulled the thick binder of financial disclosure forms toward me. Preston had submitted these documents to the mediator to prove his real estate firm was stable and legitimately required my property as a standard collateral asset. I slowly turned the crisp white pages, pretending to be confused by the complex accounting jargon. I stopped at page 47. I ran my finger down the itemized column of his corporate outgoings. "This is a very impressive portfolio, Preston," I said, keeping my voice small and hesitant. "But I am a little confused by this one specific line item." I turned the heavy binder around and slid it across the smooth mahogany wood until it rested directly in front of Chloe. "What is this recurring monthly transfer to a shell company called Apex Holdings?" I asked innocently. "It looks like a deduction of $30,000 every single month for the past 2 years. Preston instantly went completely pale. His smug smirk vanished so quickly it was almost comical. He lunged across the table to grab the binder, but Chloe snatched it up first. "Give me that!" Preston barked, his voice cracking with sudden panic. Chloe ignored him. Her perfectly manicured finger traced the line of numbers I had pointed out. Her brow furrowed in confusion. "Apex Holdings," Chloe muttered aloud. She stared at the routing numbers listed next to the massive deductions. The confusion in her eyes suddenly hardened into sharp, absolute clarity. She recognized the account numbers. I knew she would. Those were the exact routing numbers attached to her private inheritance trust fund. The fund my father had set up specifically for her before he married her off to Preston. "You are withdrawing from my private trust," Chloe whispered, her voice trembling with rising fury. "You told me the trust was locked in a long-term high-yield bond." Preston held his hands up in a placating gesture, sweating profusely under the expensive collar of his designer shirt. "Baby, listen to me. It is just a temporary loan for the business. I needed liquid capital to cover a minor shortfall on the downtown project. I was going to put it all back as soon as we secured Maya and her house." Chloe slammed the heavy binder down onto the table with a deafening crack. The mediator jumped in his expensive leather chair. "You stole from me!" Chloe shrieked, her face turning a deep, violently angry shade of red. "You have been siphoning my money for 2 years behind my back. You lied to me. You said your company was bringing in millions." My father stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. "Preston, what the hell is she talking about?" My father demanded, pointing an accusing finger at his son-in-law. "Did you touch her trust fund?" Preston stood up, his own temper flaring as he realized he was cornered. "I had to, Marcus." Preston yelled back, losing all his carefully practiced charm. "Your ridiculous demands for luxury returns were draining my accounts. You act like you are a billionaire, but you have not brought a single lucrative deal to my firm in a year. I kept this entire family afloat with that money. You ungrateful thief!" Chloe screamed, lunging across the table. She grabbed the front of Preston and his expensive shirt and yanked him forward, ripping the buttons completely off. Preston pushed her back hard, causing her to stumble into the glass wall. The mediation room descended into absolute chaos. My father charged at Preston, grabbing him by the throat. The mediator frantically scrambled out of his chair, shouting for security. I sat completely still in my cheap beige polyester suit, entirely unbothered by the violent explosion happening right in front of me. I calmly reached over, picked up my worn-out tote bag, and stood up. I watched the golden child and the perfect son-in-law tear each other apart in front of the horrified mediator. The fake image of the perfect wealthy family was shattered into a million sharp pieces, and I was the one holding the hammer. I stood up from the mahogany table, leaving my cheap tote bag exactly where it was. I walked out of the glass-walled conference room without looking back once. The sound of Chloe's shrieking and glass shattering echoed down the long hallway behind me. The mediation was officially a total disaster for them, but an absolute triumph for me. I stepped into the elevator, feeling the corners of my mouth lift into a genuine smile. My father and Preston were now deeply distracted by their own internal warfare. But I knew Chloe. She was incredibly predictable. Whenever her perfect facade was threatened, she immediately tried to overcompensate by showing off. She needed to prove to her wealthy social circle that everything was perfectly fine. 2 days later, my prediction proved completely accurate. Chloe hosted an incredibly lavish women in business brunch at her sprawling suburban mansion. I only knew about it because my Aunt Denise could not resist calling me to brag about the expensive catering and the overflowing champagne tower. Chloe had invited 50 of the most prominent wealthy women in our community. She wanted to stand in her massive living room and play the role of the successful, happily married entrepreneur. She had completely maxed out 3 different credit cards just to afford the imported caviar and the premium floral arrangements. Right in the middle of her welcoming speech, while she was holding a crystal flute of expensive champagne, a loud, heavy mechanical rumble interrupted her. The 50 wealthy women turned their heads toward the massive floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the circular driveway. A large, heavy-duty tow truck had just backed directly up to Chloe and her pristine white Porsche Cayenne. 2 men in dirty overalls jumped out and quickly began attaching heavy chains to the front axle of the luxury vehicle. Chloe dropped her crystal champagne flute. It shattered against the imported marble floor. She let out a horrifying shriek and sprinted toward the front door, pushing past her wealthy guests. She ran out into the bright afternoon sunlight, waving her arms frantically. What are you doing? Chloe screamed, her face turning bright red. Get away from my car right now. I am calling the police. The tow truck driver, a burly man with a thick beard, did not even flinch. He pulled a crumpled clipboard from his back pocket and held it out. We have a repossession order, ma'am. The driver said loudly, ensuring every single guest standing near the open front doors could hear him clearly. You have missed 3 consecutive lease payments, and your credit card on file was declined this morning. The bank wants the vehicle back today. Chloe stood frozen in absolute horror. The whispers among her wealthy guests started instantly. They were circling like sharks smelling blood in the water. Chloe frantically pulled her designer phone from her pocket and dialed her bank. She screamed at the customer service representative, demanding they process the payment immediately. The representative calmly informed her that her accounts were overdrawn and her credit line had been completely suspended due to suspicious, massive withdrawals. Preston had drained everything to cover his failing real estate projects. The tow truck engine roared to life. The heavy chains pulled the pristine white Porsche up onto the flatbed. Chloe collapsed onto her front steps, sobbing uncontrollably as the truck drove away, taking her ultimate status symbol with it. Her lavish brunch was completely ruined. Her guests awkwardly grabbed their designer purses and began making hasty excuses to leave, whispering vicious gossip as they walked to their own luxury vehicles. Chloe sat alone on her steps and dialed our father. She was completely hysterical. Maya is doing this. Chloe sobbed loudly into the phone. She is using some kind of voodoo or black magic to ruin my life. First, Preston steals from me, and now my car is gone. She is trying to destroy everything I have. My father was pacing furiously in his own office. He was already drowning in the fallout from the explosive mediation session. He refused to accept that his own terrible financial decisions were causing this collapse. Calm down, Chloe. My father snapped into the phone. Maya is not a witch. She is just a stubborn, ungrateful brat who got incredibly lucky pointing out a clerical error. But this ends next week. We have the preliminary hearing for the conservatorship. I am going to stand in front of that judge and prove she is completely unstable. I will get control of that house and I will fix all of this. I promise you, Chloe, I will utterly destroy her in that courtroom. While my father was making arrogant, empty promises, Preston was sitting in his own dark office staring blankly at his computer screen. His expensive Tom Ford shirt was still wrinkled from the violent fight with Chloe. His desk was covered in past due notices and angry letters from private investors. His cell phone rang sharply. He checked the caller identification. It was his primary commercial bank. He answered it quickly, hoping they were calling to approve his emergency loan extension. Hello, Preston said, trying to sound confident and in control. Mr. Preston? A cold, corporate voice replied on the other end. This is the commercial lending department. We are calling to formally notify you that your entire business line of credit has been acquired by a private holding company. Preston furrowed his brow. Acquired. He repeated, his voice trembling slightly. What do you mean, acquired? Who bought my debt? We are not at liberty to disclose the name of the holding company, sir. The cold voice continued. However, the new owners have invoked the immediate repayment clause written into your original contract. You are required to pay the full outstanding balance of $1.2 million within 48 hours. If you fail to produce the funds, they will begin seizing your remaining commercial assets. Preston felt the blood completely drain from his face. $1.2 million. He gasped, dropping his expensive pen onto the desk. I do not have that kind of liquid capital. You have to give me an extension. I cannot do that, sir, the bank representative stated flatly. The holding company was very specific. They want immediate payment in full. Have a good afternoon. The line went completely dead. Preston stared at his phone, his chest heaving with absolute panic. He was completely trapped. He had stolen from his wife. His father-in-law was ready to kill him. His business was 48 hours away from total collapse. He needed cash immediately, and there was only one person left who had an asset valuable enough to save him. He needed Maya and her house. That same night, the heavy Atlanta humidity finally broke into a massive thunderstorm. Rain lashed violently against the windows of my grandmother and her house. I was sitting comfortably in my living room, sipping hot chamomile tea and reviewing the digital financial ledgers Julian had sent me. The trap was perfectly set, and the prey was already suffocating. At exactly 11 o'clock, a frantic, desperate pounding echoed from my front door. I did not jump. I casually set my tablet down and walked into the dimly lit hallway to check the security monitor. Standing on my porch soaked to the bone and looking absolutely pathetic was Preston. He was looking over his shoulder nervously into the dark street, as if he expected Chloe or my father to jump out of the bushes and catch him. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the heavy door open just a few inches, leaving the thick brass security chain firmly engaged. Preston stood there shivering in his ruined, expensive designer suit. The arrogant sneer he always wore like a badge of honor was completely erased. His blonde hair was plastered to his forehead, his eyes were wildly bloodshot, and his hands were physically shaking. "Maya, please let me in," Preston begged, his voice cracking pitifully over the sound of the thunder. "I need to talk to you right now. It is a matter of absolute life and death." I stood in the warm, dry entryway and looked at him through the narrow gap in the door. "I am not taking off the chain, Preston," I said coldly. "You have exactly 2 minutes to explain why you are violating a direct legal restraining order on my front porch in the middle of the night before I call Chief Hayes and have you thrown back into a holding cell." Preston swallowed hard, wiping the heavy rain from his pale face. "I know I messed up, Maya," he stammered, speaking incredibly fast. "I know we have had our major differences, but I am begging you to listen to me as family. I am in serious financial trouble. My primary business line of credit was just bought out by some aggressive anonymous corporate holding company. They are demanding a $1.2 million repayment in exactly 48 hours. If I do not get them at least a massive good faith cash payment by tomorrow morning, they are going to legally seize my commercial accounts. My firm will be completely bankrupt. Chloe will absolutely leave me and take whatever is left. Your father will literally kill me." I felt a deep, powerful wave of satisfaction wash over me, knowing that I was the anonymous holding company destroying his life. But my facial expression remained entirely blank and unbothered. "And why exactly are you telling me this?" I asked, sipping my tea. "Because you are the only person left who can save me," Preston pleaded, pressing his wet, shaking hands against the wooden doorframe. "I know you own this house completely clear of any mortgages or liens. I know the local market value appraises it for at least $400,000. I just need you to take out a fast cash equity loan for $200,000. I can personally arrange it with a private shady lender I know by tomorrow noon. Just give me the cash to hold off this corporate holding company. I will pay you back double with maximum interest, I swear to God." I looked at him with pure, unadulterated disgust. "You brought an illegal rogue demolition crew to my house just 2 days ago," I reminded him, keeping my voice dangerously low. "You funded a fraudulent conservatorship lawsuit to try and have me declared mentally incompetent. And now you expect me to mortgage my only home, the home you tried to steal, to save your failing real estate business. You must be completely delusional." Preston shook his head frantically, drops of rain flying everywhere. "No, listen to me, Maya. I can make all of this go away for you right now." He lowered his voice, looking around the dark, rainy street again. "If you give me the $200,000, I will personally sabotage the entire conservatorship case. I have direct administrative access to the Sterling and Partners legal portal through my funding account. I can easily forge your father and his digital signature on a formal withdrawal petition. I will completely cancel the entire lawsuit tomorrow morning before the court even opens. Your father will not even know until it is completely processed and dismissed. I will get him off your back forever, Maya. Just give me the money." I just stared at him, analyzing the depths of his depravity. He was willing to commit federal wire fraud and forge legal court documents to betray his own father-in-law just to save his own skin. He was an absolute spineless coward. I let the heavy silence stretch out between us, letting the cold rain blow through the crack in the door and hit his face. "You really are a rat, Preston." I finally said, my voice completely devoid of any sympathy or warmth. "You stole thousands from your own wife and her private trust fund, and now you are offering to betray your business partner to save yourself. You honestly thought you could bully me into submission with your white privilege and your fake wealth. And when that completely failed, you crawl here to my doorstep begging for my money." I took a deliberate step back and prepared to close the door. "I do not negotiate with thieves," I said firmly. Preston and his desperate pleading expression instantly twisted back into his familiar, ugly arrogance. The panic in his eyes was rapidly replaced by pure, venomous hatred. "You stupid, ungrateful witch!" Preston spat, hitting the doorframe violently with his fist. "I offered you a guaranteed way out. I offered to save you from your own controlling father. When we get to that preliminary hearing next week, I am going to make sure the judge locks you in a psychiatric ward for the rest of your miserable, pathetic life. We are going to take this house and leave you with absolutely nothing. You hear me, Maya? You will have nothing." I slammed the heavy wooden door completely shut right in his face, cutting off his pathetic screaming. I engaged the bottom deadbolt and walked away from the entryway. The loud sound of his car tires angrily screeching down the wet street echoed faintly through the walls. I walked back into my warm kitchen and set my empty teacup into the sink. I walked over to the marble island counter where my cell phone was resting face up. The screen was brightly glowing, illuminating the dark, quiet room. A bright red audio wave was steadily pulsing across the digital display. I pressed the stop button and immediately saved the high-definition audio file directly to my highly secure cloud server. I had just recorded Preston fully admitting to his massive debt, admitting to funding the fraudulent lawsuit, and openly offering to forge legal court documents. It was the absolute ultimate nail in his legal coffin. All I had to do now was wait for the courtroom doors to finally open. It was Tuesday morning, just 3 days before the highly anticipated preliminary hearing. I was formally summoned back to the imposing downtown offices of Sterling and Partners for a mandatory legal deposition. I arrived wearing the exact same cheap beige polyester suit and scuffed flat shoes I wore to the disastrous mediation session. My legal counsel was already waiting for me in the massive glass-walled conference room. Her name was Sarah. She was actually the senior managing partner of a top-tier corporate litigation firm based in New York City. She charged over $2,000 an hour for her brilliant legal mind. But today she was dressed in a faded, oversized wool cardigan and thick, unflattering plastic glasses. She was perfectly playing the role of an overworked, underpaid, and deeply inexperienced public defender. Across the long, polished mahogany table sat Vance. He was the aggressive lead attorney my father and Preston had hired. Vance was a man who notoriously prided himself on utterly destroying his legal opponents through vicious psychological intimidation. My father and Chloe sat directly behind him in plush leather chairs. My father was leaning back with his legs crossed, looking incredibly smug. Chloe was glaring at me with pure, unadulterated hatred, clearly still furious about her repossessed luxury vehicle. A licensed court reporter sat quietly in the far corner typing away on her small black machine to capture every single spoken word. Vance started the formal deposition with a brutal barrage of highly condescending questions. He wanted to officially establish a legal baseline of my supposed mental incompetence and abject poverty. He asked pointed questions about my lack of a traditional college degree. He mocked my supposed menial data entry job at the dingy tax preparation office. I answered all of his questions softly, keeping my head down and my shoulders slightly hunched. I deliberately stumbled over my words. I purposefully acted like a broken woman who was completely overwhelmed and terrified by the complex legal process. Vance smirked continually. He clearly thought I was an incredibly pathetic and easy target. Then Vance opened his expensive leather briefcase and pulled out a thick yellow folder. "Let the official record reflect that I am now presenting Exhibit A," Vance said loudly, sliding a heavy stack of stapled papers across the smooth table. "These are certified medical evaluations recently obtained by your deeply concerned father. They clearly indicate a long documented history of severe paranoia, dangerous delusions, and a complete inability to manage basic personal finances or make rational life decisions." I looked down at the papers resting in front of me. They were entirely fabricated from top to bottom. My father had obviously used his remaining cash to bribe a highly unethical private psychiatrist. This corrupt doctor had written a damning psychiatric evaluation without ever actually examining me or speaking to me in person. It was a blatant illegal forgery designed solely to strip away my human rights. "Is it not true, Maya, that you currently have less than $500 to your name in a standard checking account?" Vance demanded, leaning forward aggressively to invade my personal space. "Is it not true that you regularly suffer from paranoid delusions that your loving family is actively trying to harm you? Have you not exhibited violent tendencies toward your own brother-in-law and sister within the last 72 hours? I let my hands tremble visibly as they rested on the mahogany table. I looked up at Vance with wide, frightened eyes. "I do not understand any of these complicated medical papers," I whispered, my voice cracking perfectly to convey deep emotional distress. "I just want to keep my grandmother in her house. It is the only thing I have left in this world. Why are you doing this to me?" My father let out a heavy theatrical sigh from the back of the room. He leaned forward and put on his best fake grieving parent face. "We just want you to get the professional psychiatric help you so desperately need, sweetheart." My father lied smoothly for the official court record. "We are doing this to save you from yourself." Chloe scoffed loudly, rolling her eyes. "She belongs in a locked ward," Chloe muttered bitterly, crossing her arms over her chest. Vance smiled a cruel, highly triumphant smile. He leaned back in his expensive chair and looked over at Sarah, my pretending public defender. He looked at her faded cardigan with absolute professional disgust. "I think we have absolutely everything we need here, counselor," Vance said, snapping his briefcase shut with a loud, definitive click. "Your client is clearly unstable and completely legally incompetent. We will see you in court on Friday morning. I highly suggest you advise her to formally surrender the property deed before the judge mandates a permanent institutional hold." Sarah adjusted her thick plastic glasses and looked down at her legal pad, acting appropriately intimidated. "I will discuss the settlement options with my client, Mr. Vance," Sarah murmured quietly. Vance stood up. My father and Chloe stood up right behind him. They marched out of the glass conference room, laughing quietly to themselves, completely convinced they had just secured a massive, effortless victory. The court reporter packed up her typing machine and quietly exited the room. The heavy glass door clicked shut, leaving Sarah and me entirely alone in the massive, silent space. I instantly dropped the frightened victim act. I stopped trembling. I sat up perfectly straight and rolled my shoulders back, releasing the fake tension. I pushed the fabricated medical records away from me with a look of pure disgust. Sarah reached up and pulled off her thick plastic glasses, tossing them onto the mahogany table. She turned to look at me, and a sharp, brilliant smile slowly spread across her face. They took the bait completely. Sarah whispered, leaning closer to me, her eyes shining with absolute predatory anticipation. They were so blinded by their own extreme arrogance, they did not even bother to check the shell companies. Sarah and I walked out of the towering office building feeling a quiet but absolute sense of victory. I returned to my normal routine the next morning, acting as if the deposition had completely broken my spirit. But my father Marcus was not satisfied with just a legal victory. He wanted to completely destroy my reputation in the community before Friday. He wanted to ensure that even if I somehow kept my house, I would be a total outcast. On Wednesday morning, I woke up to my cell phone buzzing relentlessly with messages from the few friends I still had in the neighborhood. They were all telling me to turn on the local community radio station. I went to my kitchen, poured a cup of coffee, and turned on the small digital radio on the counter. The smooth, booming voice of the popular morning host filled the room. But it was the guest speaking that made my blood run cold. It was my father. He was using his best, fake crying voice. He was on a live broadcast reaching thousands of local listeners, painting himself as the ultimate tragic victim. "It breaks my heart to do this," my father said over the radio, his voice shaking with manufactured grief. "But my daughter Maya is deeply sick. She has completely lost touch with reality. We are trying to get her psychiatric help, but she is violently resisting us. She even had my innocent son-in-law Preston falsely arrested. I am just a desperate father trying to save my child." The radio host asked him why Maya was living alone in the grandmother and her old house. My father let out a heavy, dramatic sigh. Maya was always troubled. My father lied smoothly to the entire city. When she was a teenager, her behavior became so erratic that we had to send her to live with her grandmother for her own good. We practically had to adopt her out to protect her younger sister Chloe. We tried everything to fix her, but she always resented us for her own failures. I gripped my coffee mug tightly. The sheer audacity of his lies was breathtaking. He did not send me to live with my grandmother because I was troubled. He abandoned me there when I was 16 because I refused to worship him the way Chloe did. I saw right through his narcissism, even as a teenager, and he absolutely hated me for it. He dumped me at that old house and cut off all financial support the second I turned 18. My grandmother was the only one who actually raised me with love and discipline. Now he was twisting his own terrible parenting into a fake sob story to win public sympathy. The radio broadcast had an immediate and toxic effect on my daily life. My father had successfully weaponized the entire community against me. Later that afternoon, I drove my unassuming sedan to the local grocery store to pick up a few items for dinner. The moment I walked through the sliding glass doors, the heavy whispers started. I recognized several women from the First Zion Baptist Church standing near the produce section. They actively turned their backs on me, pretending to examine the apples while openly gossiping about my supposed mental breakdown. The cashier, who had known me for 10 years, refused to make eye contact and shoved my receipt across the counter without saying a single word. I kept my head held high, ignoring their ignorant judgment. I walked out into the parking lot, pushing my small shopping cart. As I approached my vehicle, I noticed an older woman walking quickly away from my car, holding something shiny in her hand. It was Sister Mary, one of the most prominent deacons at our church, and a close personal friend of my father. I looked down at my car. Both of my front tires were completely slashed. The thick rubber was brutally torn, and the heavy vehicle was sagging toward the hot asphalt. Sister Mary stopped a few feet away and turned around to look at me. She did not even try to hide the small pocket knife in her hand. She looked at me with righteous religious fury. "You are a wicked, ungrateful child, Maya!" Sister Mary yelled loudly across the parking lot, drawing the attention of several other shoppers. "Your father is a good Christian man bleeding his heart out on the radio this morning while you try to destroy his family. You need to repent and surrender that house before God strikes you down." I looked at my ruined tires and then looked at Sister Mary. I did not scream or curse at her. I simply pulled out my phone and took a clear photograph of her holding the knife next to my vandalized car. "You are going to have a very hard time explaining this to the police, Mary," I said, my voice ice cold. She scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. "Call them," she challenged arrogantly. "Let us see who they believe. A respected church elder or a crazy woman who throws coffee at her own sister." She turned and marched away, feeling entirely justified in her criminal behavior. I did not bother calling the police right then. A vandalism charge was far too small for what I was currently building. I called a premium towing service, requested a flatbed, and sat calmly on the concrete curb waiting for them to arrive. The humid afternoon heat was oppressive, but I felt completely numb to it. The entire community was turning their backs on me based on the malicious lies of a deeply insecure man. As I sat there waiting, my encrypted, secure phone vibrated deep inside my purse. I pulled it out and opened the specialized messaging application. It was a direct priority text from Julian, my lead investigator. I opened the file attachment. The message was short but absolutely devastating. Julian wrote that they had successfully penetrated the firewall of the offshore accounts. The documents attached were the holy grail of financial ruin. I scrolled through the high-definition images. It was undeniable ironclad proof. Preston had not just been siphoning money from his wife. He had been actively embezzling hundreds of thousands of dollars from his own corporate clients for over 3 years. But the second document was even better. It was a massive shadow ledger proving my father had been committing severe federal tax fraud, for the last decade hiding his failing assets in illegal dummy corporations. I smiled, staring at the bright screen of my phone. My father wanted to play his games in the court of public opinion on a cheap local radio show. I was going to play my game in a federal courtroom. I locked my phone and watched the tow truck pull into the parking lot. The smear campaign had just officially peaked, and their total destruction was only 2 days away. Thursday evening arrived, bringing a heavy downpour that finally broke the oppressive humidity. It was the eve of the preliminary hearing. I sat in my quiet living room reviewing the massive shadow ledgers Julian had sent me. The sheer volume of my father and his financial crimes was staggering. He had built his public persona on a mountain of fraudulent tax returns. Preston was even worse. His 48-hour deadline to repay the $1.2 million debt was rapidly approaching. They were both walking directly into a legal slaughterhouse tomorrow morning. To celebrate my impending victory privately, I decided to order a premium dry-aged steak for takeout from Capital Prime. It was the most exclusive steakhouse in the downtown commercial district. I put on a simple, elegant black dress, grabbed my umbrella, and drove out into the rainy night. When I arrived at Capital Prime, the valet took my car and I stepped into the lavish, dimly lit foyer. The restaurant smelled of rich roasted garlic and expensive red wine. I walked up to the mahogany hostess stand to collect my order. A sudden loud burst of laughter echoed from the main dining room. I recognized that deep, booming sound instantly. It was my father. I looked through the decorative glass partition. My father was holding court at a massive round table right in the center of the room. He had invited several prominent members of his firm to a lavish pre-victory dinner party. The table was covered in empty crystal wine glasses and thick, expensive cuts of meat. My father was standing at the head of the table, holding his glass high in the air, wearing a sickeningly smug smile. "Let us raise a glass to the future," my father announced loudly, ensuring neighboring tables could hear him. "Tomorrow morning, we finally secure the long-term stability of this family. We are taking back the old house for Preston and his business. And more importantly, we are finally putting Maya in her proper place. She will be much safer locked away in a quiet facility where she cannot embarrass this family name any longer. To securing our legacy." The table erupted into loud cheers. Chloe was clapping excitedly, her eyes shining with malicious joy. But right next to her, Preston looked physically ill. He was sweating profusely and barely raised his glass. He knew winning the house tomorrow would not save him from the massive debt due tomorrow. He was a dead man walking, trying desperately to pretend he was still breathing. Chloe casually turned her head and spotted me standing near the foyer, her face twisted into a vicious, mocking smirk. She immediately stood up, pushing her heavy wooden chair back loudly. She grabbed her designer clutch and marched directly across the crowded dining room toward me. Several waiters carrying heavy trays had to quickly step out of her way. "Well, look who it is," Chloe announced, her shrill voice slicing through the ambient noise. "The crazy spinster herself. Did you get lost on your way to the cheap drive through Maya? What are you even doing in a place like this?" I stood my ground and looked at her calmly. "I am picking up my dinner, Chloe," I said, keeping my tone perfectly level. "You should go back to your table and enjoy your celebration while it lasts." Chloe let out a loud theatrical laugh that drew the attention of several nearby patrons. The hostess returned holding my black paper takeout bag, but she froze awkwardly. "Picking up dinner," Chloe mocked loudly, stepping closer. Are you spending the absolute last pennies in your pathetic checking account before Dad legally freezes it tomorrow morning? After the judge declares you insane, you will not even be able to buy a cup of coffee. My father noticed the commotion and walked over slowly, playing the role of the exhausted, benevolent patriarch. "Now, Chloe, leave your sister alone," my father said with a deeply condescending sigh. "She is clearly unwell. We should not mock the mentally disturbed in public. It is bad for our image." Chloe smirked and reached into her expensive designer clutch. She pulled out a crisp $20 bill. She aggressively shoved it toward my chest, but I did not reach up to take it. The bill fluttered down and landed directly on the polished hardwood floor right at my feet. "Consider that a donation for charity," Chloe sneered, looking down at me with absolute contempt. "Buy yourself something nice before they lock you in the padded room tomorrow. Try to have a good final night of freedom, Maya." The restaurant went incredibly quiet. Waiters and wealthy patrons were openly staring at us. My father looked at me with cold, calculating eyes, fully expecting me to scream or cry. He wanted me to prove his narrative of instability right there in the middle of the expensive steakhouse. I looked down at the $20 bill resting on the floor. I did not bend down to pick it up. I calmly reached out and took my takeout bag from the stunned hostess. I turned my attention away from my sister, completely dismissing her existence. I looked my father dead in his eyes. I did not raise my voice, but I spoke with a lethal clarity that carried perfectly through the silent room. "Enjoy the steak, Marcus," I said, holding his gaze until I saw a tiny flicker of genuine uncertainty flash across his arrogant face. "Enjoy the wine and the celebration tonight, because tomorrow morning you are going to completely lose your appetite." I stepped right over the $20 bill and pushed open the heavy glass doors. I walked out into the cool, rainy night. Tomorrow morning, I was going to tear their entire fake empire down to the studs. Friday morning arrived with brilliant, piercing sunlight that completely burned away the previous night and its heavy rain. I pulled my car into the secure underground parking garage of the county courthouse. Today was the day. I did not wear the cheap beige polyester suit. Instead, I wore a custom-tailored charcoal gray suit made of pure Italian wool, paired with a crisp white silk blouse and my signature diamond tennis bracelet. My hair was styled perfectly. I carried a genuine Birkin bag that cost more than my father and his entire luxury car collection combined. When I walked out of the elevator and stepped into the main marble corridor of the courthouse, the atmosphere shifted instantly. My father Marcus was standing near the heavy wooden doors of Courtroom 4. He had brought an entire entourage of spectators to witness my destruction. Chloe was there wearing a bright pink designer dress that was entirely inappropriate for a serious legal proceeding. Preston stood beside her, looking slightly nauseous, but trying desperately to maintain his arrogant posture. They had also brought Aunt Denise's sister Mary and several other gossiping relatives from the church. They were standing in a wide circle, laughing and talking loudly, acting as if they were attending a highly exclusive social event rather than a tragic family legal battle. The moment I walked down the corridor, the laughter abruptly died. Every single head turned to stare at me. Aunt Denise dropped her jaw. Sister Mary clutched her leather purse tightly against her chest, but it was Preston whose reaction was the most telling. He took one look at the impeccable cut of my suit, the unmistakable quality of my leather bag, and the absolute total confidence in my stride. He did a physical double-take. His eyes widened in deep confusion. He worked in commercial real estate, handling high-net-worth clients. He knew exactly what quiet luxury looked like, and he knew it cost an absolute fortune. I walked right past them without making eye contact. I pushed open the heavy wooden doors and walked into the courtroom. My lawyer Sarah was already sitting at the defense table. She had also completely dropped her timid public defender disguise. She was wearing a razor-sharp navy blue suit, and her posture radiated absolute lethal corporate authority. Vance, my father, and his aggressive lawyer, was sitting at the plaintiff table shuffling his papers. He glanced over at us, and his confident smirk faltered for just a fraction of a second. He noticed the sudden drastic change in our demeanor, but he arrogantly brushed it off, assuming we were just putting on a brave face. The bailiff announced the arrival of Judge Harrison. He was an older, stern man with a reputation for having absolutely zero tolerance for courtroom games. He took his seat at the high bench and slammed his wooden gavel down to officially open the preliminary hearing. Vance immediately stood up. He puffed out his chest and delivered a highly dramatic opening statement. He painted a tragic picture of a broken family trying desperately to save a deeply disturbed young woman from her own severe mental illness. He urged the judge to grant the emergency conservatorship to prevent me from squandering my only asset, which was my grandmother and her house. To establish this fabricated baseline of my instability, Vance called his very first witness to the stand. "I call Preston to the stand," Vance announced loudly. Preston adjusted his expensive tie and walked up to the wooden witness box. He placed his hand on the Bible and swore to tell the whole truth. He sat down and adjusted the microphone. Vance approached him with a warm, sympathetic smile, encouraging Preston to tell his terrible story. Preston lied effortlessly under oath. He told the judge that I was completely broke, living in absolute squalor, and incapable of holding down a real job. He claimed that I constantly harassed his wife Chloe out of pure, bitter jealousy. Then he brought up the incident at my house. He testified that he had simply hired a contractor to do some basic safety repairs on my rotting back porch entirely out of the goodness of his own heart. He told the judge that I had come charging out of the house screaming like a wild animal threatening to kill his workers, and that I had maliciously manipulated the local police into arresting him. It was a perfectly crafted narrative of pure victimization. The aunts and uncles sitting in the public gallery gasped and whispered among themselves, nodding in agreement with his horrific lies. My father sat at the plaintiff table looking incredibly proud of his son-in-law. Chloe was practically glowing with smug satisfaction. They all believed they had just successfully nailed my coffin shut. Vance thanked Preston and confidently returned to his seat. Judge Harrison looked over at our table. "Does the defense wish to cross-examine the witness?" the judge asked. Sarah stood up. "Yes, Your Honor," she replied. Her voice was no longer small or hesitant. It was loud, commanding, and echoed with absolute power. She did not grab a legal pad. She did not bring the fake medical records. She picked up a single sheet of crisp white paper from her briefcase and walked directly toward the witness stand. The loud click of her heels against the hardwood floor sounded like a ticking clock in the quiet room. Sarah stopped right in front of Preston. She looked at him with eyes as cold as absolute ice. "Mr. Preston, you just testified under penalty of perjury that my client Maya is entirely destitute and heavily reliant on your family for basic survival. Is that correct?" Sarah asked sharply. "Yes, it is," Preston replied, lifting his chin arrogantly. "She has absolutely nothing." Sarah did not blink. She slowly handed the single sheet of paper to Preston. It was a highly detailed bank statement. The account holder name at the top was heavily redacted with thick black ink. "I want you to look closely at that document, Mr. Preston," Sarah instructed, her voice echoing in the silent courtroom. "Can you please read the current available balance listed at the bottom of that corporate checking account out loud for the official court record?" Preston took the paper. He looked down at the highlighted number. The arrogant sneer instantly melted off his face. His blue eyes widened in sheer absolute terror. The blood completely drained from his cheeks, leaving him looking like a ghost. He opened his mouth to speak, but absolutely no sound came out. He just sat there staring at the massive, impossible number, completely paralyzed by the trap that had just violently snapped shut around him. Sarah stood perfectly still, waiting for Preston to find his voice. The silence in the courtroom grew incredibly heavy. Preston swallowed hard, his Adam apple bobbing nervously in his throat. He looked desperately over at my father Marcus, and then at his expensive lawyer Vance. He was looking for a lifeline, but nobody at the plaintiff table knew what was printed on that single sheet of paper. "Read the balance out loud, Mr. Preston," Sarah repeated, her voice echoing against the high wooden walls of the courtroom. "The court is waiting for your answer." "I cannot," Preston stammered. His voice was a pathetic, weak whisper, completely stripping away the confident, arrogant persona he had worn just moments ago. His hands were shaking so violently that the crisp white paper audibly rattled in his grip. "I do not know what this is. This is not my document." Vance suddenly leaped out of his expensive leather chair. "Objection, Your Honor!" Vance shouted, his face flushing red with sudden indignation. He aggressively pointed a finger at Sarah. "Opposing counsel is clearly trying to ambush my witness with unverified financial documents. This is highly improper and completely irrelevant to the matter of the conservatorship. We demand to see this supposed evidence immediately." Sarah did not even flinch at his outburst. She calmly reached into her briefcase and pulled out a second identical copy of the bank statement. She walked over to the plaintiff table and slid it directly in front of Vance. "It is highly relevant to the credibility of your witness, counselor," Sarah stated flatly. "Mr. Preston just testified under oath that my client is completely destitute. This verified corporate banking statement directly contradicts his testimony and proves he is committing perjury on the stand." Vance looked down at the document. My father Marcus leaned over trying to see the numbers, but Vance quickly covered the paper with his hand. Vance looked back up at the judge, his confident smirk completely gone. "Your Honor, this document has a redacted account holder name." Vance argued desperately. "It proves absolutely nothing. It could belong to anyone." Judge Harrison leaned forward and extended his hand. "Bring the document to the bench, counselor," the judge ordered. Sarah walked up to the high wooden bench and handed a third unredacted copy directly to the judge. Judge Harrison adjusted his reading glasses and looked down at the paper. His bushy gray eyebrows shot up in genuine surprise. He looked at the massive account balance and then looked over at me sitting quietly at the defense table. He then turned his stern gaze back to Vance. "The court accepts this document into evidence," Judge Harrison announced, his voice booming with absolute authority. "The objection is completely overruled. The witness will answer the question presented by the defense counsel." The gallery erupted into furious, shocked whispers. Aunt Denise clutched her pearl necklace, turning to Sister Mary with wide eyes. My father Marcus slammed his fist quietly against his thigh, his jaw clenching in deep frustration. He could feel the absolute control he thought he had slipping rapidly through his fingers. He had paid Vance an absolute fortune to ensure this hearing was a simple formality. Now his expensive lawyer was being completely outmaneuvered by a woman dressed like a high-powered corporate executive. Chloe leaned over the heavy wooden railing dividing the public gallery from the main court floor. She hissed loudly, trying to get the immediate attention of her husband. "It is probably a fake document, Preston," Chloe muttered, her voice carrying clearly through the tense, quiet room. "She is just trying to trick you. Do not let her intimidate you. Just tell the judge she forged it." Judge Harrison slammed his wooden gavel down hard. "Order in my courtroom," the judge barked, glaring directly at Chloe. "One more outburst from the gallery and I will have the bailiffs clear this entire room. Do you understand me, young lady?" Chloe shrank back into her wooden pew, her face turning bright crimson from the public reprimand. She crossed her arms tightly over her chest, glaring daggers at my back. She was not used to anyone speaking to her with such authority, and it infuriated her even more. Sarah turned her attention back to the witness stand. Preston was sweating profusely now. Large, heavy beads of perspiration were rolling down his pale forehead and soaking into the crisp collar of his designer shirt. He looked completely trapped, like a frightened animal caught in a brutal steel snare. He knew exactly what the redacted bank statement meant, but admitting it out loud would destroy his entire fabricated narrative. "Let us move on since you are having so much trouble reading a simple number, Mr. Preston," Sarah said, her tone dripping with professional mockery. "Let us talk about your own financial stability instead. You testified earlier that your commercial real estate firm is highly successful and booming. You claimed you were generously trying to help my client by taking her property off her hands." Preston nodded weakly, unable to find his voice. He wiped his sweating forehead with the back of his trembling hand. "So you are a highly successful, wealthy man?" Sarah asked, tilting her head slightly. "You are in complete control of your massive corporate assets, yes," Preston managed to croak out. His voice was barely audible over the low hum of the courtroom air conditioning. Sarah smiled a cold, predatory smile. She picked up another document from her pristine leather briefcase. She did not hand this one to Preston. She held it up so the judge and the entire courtroom could see the thick, bold red stamp across the top page. "Then you can surely explain this formal notice of immediate debt collection." Sarah said, her voice slicing through the heavy silence like a razor blade. She began pacing slowly back and forth in front of the witness box. "Is it not true, Preston, that your highly successful real estate firm is actually on the absolute brink of total bankruptcy?" Vance jumped up again, practically knocking his leather chair over backwards. "Objection!" Vance yelled loudly. "This is a harassment tactic. My client and his business finances are not on trial here today." "Overruled." Judge Harrison snapped instantly, not even looking at Vance. The plaintiff opened the door to his own financial credibility during his direct testimony. "I will allow this line of questioning." "Proceed, counselor." Vance sank back into his chair, looking completely defeated. My father Marcus was staring at Preston with a look of pure, dawning horror. He was finally beginning to realize that the golden son-in-law he had trusted with his entire legacy was hiding a massive, disastrous secret. The foundation of their united front was crumbling. Sarah stopped pacing and planted herself directly in front of Preston. She locked her eyes onto his terrified, sweating face. She did not yell, but her voice carried a lethal, heavy weight that commanded the absolute attention of every single person in the room. "Is it not true, Preston, that you are currently $1.2 million in debt to a private holding company called Obsidian Holdings?" Sarah asked clearly and deliberately, ensuring the court reporter captured every single syllable. "And is it not true that they have formally demanded immediate repayment in full by this exact afternoon?" Preston physically slumped forward in the wooden chair. The color completely left his eyes. His chest was heaving with rapid, shallow breaths as panic consumed him. He looked out into the gallery and met the eyes of my father Marcus. My father was staring at him with absolute murderous rage. Preston then looked at Chloe, who was covering her open mouth with her hand, staring at her husband in complete and utter disbelief. Preston started sweating profusely, gripping the edges of the witness stand so hard his knuckles turned completely white. Preston started sweating profusely, gripping the edges of the witness stand so hard his knuckles turned completely white. He opened his mouth, but absolutely no words came out. He simply could not formulate a lie massive enough to cover the absolute reality of his complete financial ruin. Vance quickly jumped to his feet, practically shouting to the judge that his witness was suffering from a sudden severe medical emergency. He frantically requested permission for Preston to step down immediately. Judge Harrison narrowed his eyes, looking at the pathetic, sweating man in the witness box. The judge allowed Preston to be excused, but formally noted for the court record that the witness had completely failed to answer the cross-examination. Preston stumbled out of the wooden box and practically collapsed into the gallery pew next to Chloe. She immediately shrank away from him, looking at her husband with pure, unadulterated disgust. The plaintiff table was in complete disarray. Vance was frantically shuffling his papers and whispering furiously to his paralegal. But my father Marcus could not stand the public humiliation. His immense ego demanded absolute control, and he watched his perfect legal strategy disintegrate right in front of him. Before Vance could even formulate a backup plan, Marcus stood up abruptly. "I demand to take the stand," Marcus announced, his deep voice booming with artificial authority. "I will clear up this absolute nonsense right now." Vance tried to pull him back down by his suit jacket, but Marcus violently yanked his arm away. He marched confidently up to the witness stand, placed his hand on the heavy Bible, and swore his oath. He sat down and adjusted his tailored jacket, looking out at the courtroom with a severe, commanding glare. He fully believed his sheer presence and patriarchal authority would instantly sway the judge and completely erase the disaster Preston had just caused. Vance had no choice but to follow his arrogant client. He approached the stand and gently asked Marcus to explain the situation to the court. My father took a deep breath and immediately doubled down on every single lie. He painted himself as a deeply grieving, exhausted father who had spent years trying to save his completely unhinged daughter. He claimed that I was a pathological liar who spent my days locked in a filthy house, completely disconnected from reality. He told the judge that the bank statement Sarah produced was obviously a malicious forgery created by my deeply disturbed mind to ruin my sister and her marriage. He spoke with such passionate fake conviction that several members of the church gallery actually nodded in sympathetic agreement. I just want my little girl to be safe. Marcus concluded, his voice breaking, with perfectly rehearsed emotion. She is a danger to herself and to this family. She needs to be placed in a secure medical facility today before she does irreparable harm. Vance thanked him and sat down looking slightly relieved. Marcus leaned back in the witness chair looking immensely satisfied. He thought he had successfully wrestled the narrative back into his absolute control. Sarah stood up from our table. She did not carry a single piece of paper with her. She walked slowly toward the witness box, the sharp click of her heels echoing ominously. Mr. Marcus, you paint a very tragic picture. Sarah began, her voice completely devoid of any sympathy. You present yourself to this court as a highly successful, wealthy patriarch who only wants to protect his family assets from his mentally unstable daughter. Is that an accurate summary of your testimony? Marcus lifted his chin arrogantly. Yes, it is. He replied firmly. I have spent 30 years building a massive, spotless corporate legacy. I will not let her delusions destroy it. Sarah stopped walking. She turned around and walked back to our defense table. She reached into her pristine leather briefcase and pulled out a massive, heavy black binder. It was the complete collection of the shadow ledgers Julian had legally acquired from the offshore accounts. Sarah slammed the thick binder onto the mahogany table with a loud, echoing crack that made Marcus physically jump in his seat. A spotless corporate legacy. Sarah repeated, mocking his exact words. Let us talk about that legacy, Mr. Marcus. Let us talk about a dummy corporation registered in the Cayman Islands under the name Apex Global Management. The smug, confident expression vanished from my father and his face instantly. His jaw tightened and his dark eyes darted nervously toward Vance. Is it not true, Mr. Marcus, that your primary commercial real estate firm has not turned an actual verifiable profit in over 4 years? Sarah asked, her voice rising in power and intensity. Is it not true that you are currently under a massive secret federal audit for claiming millions of dollars in fraudulent business losses? Vance leaped to his feet. Objection. Vance screamed, waving his arms frantically. This is outrageous, Your Honor. This has absolutely nothing to do with the conservatorship of Maya. It has absolutely everything to do with it, Your Honor. Sarah fired back, turning to face Judge Harrison. We are establishing clear financial motive. The plaintiff is not trying to protect his daughter. He is desperately trying to seize her fully paid-off, unencumbered property, to liquidate it and pay off his own massive hidden federal tax liabilities. Judge Harrison looked at the heavy black binder on Sarah and her table, and then looked at Marcus, whose face was rapidly turning a violent shade of purple. I will allow it, Judge Harrison ruled firmly. The witness will answer the question. Sarah picked up the thick binder and marched directly up to the witness stand. She dropped it right on the wooden ledge in front of Marcus. The pages spilled open, revealing complex spreadsheets, highlighted in bright yellow ink. Look at the numbers, Marcus, Sarah demanded, dropping the polite formalities completely. Admit to this court that you are completely bankrupt. Admit that you orchestrated this entire fraudulent legal proceeding just to steal your own daughter and her house to save yourself from federal prison. Marcus stared at the highly classified financial documents. He realized in that exact moment that he was completely trapped. His absolute worst nightmare was coming true right in front of the entire community. He was being fully exposed as a total fraud, a failure, and a desperate criminal. His massive, fragile ego simply could not process the deep public humiliation. He could not accept that the daughter he had abused and discarded for years was the one orchestrating his total destruction. He completely lost his temper, his face contorted into a mask of pure, unhinged rage. He ignored Sarah completely and stood up violently in the witness box. He pointed a shaking, furious finger directly across the courtroom right at me. I sat perfectly still at the defense table, simply tapping my diamond tennis bracelet against the wood and watching him break. She is completely unstable. Marcus screamed at the absolute top of his lungs, his voice cracking with blind fury. She is completely unstable and incapable of managing her own life. The echo of my father and his furious screaming bounced off the high vaulted ceilings of the courtroom, and then faded into an absolute dead silence. It was a suffocating, heavy quiet. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Aunt Denise froze with her hand covering her mouth. Chloe sat rigidly in the wooden pew, her eyes darting frantically between the judge and her father. I did not flinch at his outburst. I simply sat there in my custom Italian suit, radiating a cold, untouchable calm. Judge Harrison did not reach for his wooden gavel. He did not yell at my father for his sudden violent outburst. Instead, the judge simply stared at him. He leaned forward heavily over the thick wooden bench, placing both of his hands flat on the surface. He slowly reached up and adjusted his reading glasses, resting on the bridge of his nose. He looked down at my father with an expression of profound, absolute disbelief. "Do you seriously not recognize her?" Judge Harrison asked. His voice was low, but it carried a lethal weight that commanded the entire room. My father froze completely, his jaw physically dropped open. He looked around the courtroom in total confusion, the violent red color slowly draining from his face. "Recognize who?" My father stammered, his arrogant authority completely evaporating. "What are you talking about? I know my own daughter. She is a broken failure who needs to be locked up." While my father was screaming his pathetic insults, Sarah had casually walked over to the court clerk. She had handed the clerk a new finalized legal dossier. The clerk immediately passed a copy down to Vance at the plaintiff table. Vance, the ruthless, high-priced corporate lawyer, was suddenly panicking. He ripped open the heavy manila folder and began frantically flipping through the thick stack of newly submitted corporate registry documents. His hands were shaking so violently that the crisp white papers were loudly rattling against the polished mahogany table. He was reading the certified articles of incorporation, the federal tax filings, and the official banking charters. Vance gasped out loud. He physically collapsed back into his leather chair, dropping the documents onto the table as if they had physically burned him. He looked over at me sitting at the defense table. The smug, arrogant smirk he had worn since the deposition was completely gone, replaced by sheer, absolute professional terror. "What is it, Vance?" my father demanded, gripping the wooden edge of the witness stand. "What did she give you? Tell the judge it is a fake. Tell him she forged it." Vance did not even look at his client. He just kept staring at me, realizing he had just walked his entire legal career into a massive, lethal trap. He had spent the last week actively harassing and attempting to legally destroy a woman with more wealth and power than his entire law firm combined. Judge Harrison let out a deep, heavy sigh of absolute contempt. He looked at my father standing in the witness box, sweating and completely unraveling. The judge reached out and grabbed the heavy digital monitor resting on his high bench. He turned the screen completely around so the glowing display was facing directly outward toward the witness box. "You come into my courtroom, Mr. Marcus, and demand that I strip away the basic human rights of an innocent woman." Judge Harrison said, his voice laced with righteous anger. "You present fraudulent medical records. You allow your son-in-law to commit blatant perjury on my witness stand. And you do it all while aggressively lecturing this court about your pristine corporate legacy." My father swallowed hard, staring blindly at the glowing monitor. He could not read the small text from where he stood, but the sheer gravity of the judge and his words was physically crushing him. "Let me introduce you to the reality of your situation." Judge Harrison continued, picking up his own copy of the dossier. "Mr. Marcus," the woman sitting at that defense table, The woman you are desperately trying to declare legally incompetent so you can steal her only home. She does not work as a data entry clerk at a strip mall tax office. The entire gallery held its collective breath. Sister Mary leaned forward, gripping the wooden pew in front of her. Chloe stood up slightly, her face a mask of panicked confusion. She is the sole founder and chief executive officer of Obsidian Holdings. Judge Harrison announced the name, dropping like a massive, unexploded bomb directly into the center of the room. She manages a private equity portfolio worth over $450 million. She single-handedly owns the massive corporate debt that is currently bankrupting your son-in-law. She is one of the most successful self-made private investors in this entire state. The courtroom exploded into absolute chaos. Gasps and shocked screams erupted from the gallery. Aunt Denise practically fainted, falling back against Sister Mary. Chloe shrieked out loud, gripping her designer hair in absolute denial. Preston, who was still sitting in the front row, completely slumped forward, burying his face in his hands as his absolute destruction was finally made public. My father stood frozen in the witness box. His eyes were wide and completely vacant. He looked like a man who had just been struck by lightning. Obsidian Holdings. He whispered the words, barely escaping his dry throat. It was the exact same holding company that Julian had used to buy up all of his failing commercial debt just 24 hours ago. He slowly turned his head to look at me. The realization hit him with the force of a freight train. He finally understood why I had been so calm. He finally understood why I had worn the cheap polyester suit to the mediation and why I was sitting here now in custom Italian wool. I had not been hiding from him. I had been patiently guiding him directly into an inescapable slaughterhouse of his own making. I sat perfectly still. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I simply looked back at him with the cold, detached gaze of an apex predator watching its prey finally stop struggling. The illusion of his power was dead. The reality of my empire was undeniable. And I was not even close to being finished with them. The silence held for exactly 3 more seconds before it completely shattered. Chloe could not handle the reality of my success. She jumped up from the heavy wooden pew, knocking her designer purse onto the floor. "It is a lie!" Chloe shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at the judge. "It is a complete fabrication. She works in a disgusting little cubicle. She cannot even afford to buy her own clothes. She manipulated those documents just like she manipulated Grandma. Arrest her." Judge Harrison glared at Chloe and reached for his gavel, but I beat him to it. I finally stood up from the defense table. I did not rush. I smoothed the front of my Italian wool suit and looked directly at my screaming sister. "Sit down, Chloe," I said. My voice was not loud, but it carried a cold, razor-sharp authority that instantly cut through her hysterical shrieking. "You are embarrassing yourself in a federal courtroom." Chloe opened her mouth to scream again, but the sheer, icy weight of my stare forced her jaw shut. She slowly sank back onto the wooden bench, looking like a terrified child who had just been deeply reprimanded. I turned my attention back to the witness box where my father Marcus was still standing, completely frozen in a state of absolute shock. "You always called me a bad investment, Marcus," I said, pacing slowly in front of the defense table. "You told everyone I was a pathetic dropout who would never amount to anything. You were so blinded by your own narcissism that you never bothered to actually look at what I was building right under your nose." I walked over to Sarah and picked up the heavy black binder. I held it up for the entire courtroom to see. When I dropped out of college, it was not because I was failing. It was because I realized the traditional educational system was moving far too slowly for my ambition. I took the tiny fraction of money grandmother gave me, the exact same money you violently demanded I hand over to you, and I invested it. I started flipping foreclosed commercial properties in developing neighborhoods. I used the profits to fund tech startups. I built Obsidian Holdings from the ground up while sitting in the back of that dingy tax office you loved to mock. My father gripped the wooden rail of the witness box, his knuckles turning stark white. He looked physically ill. "You lied to us." My father whispered, his voice completely broken. You lied to your own family for 10 years. I did not lie to you, Marcus. I replied, my tone completely devoid of any emotion. I simply let you believe your own arrogant assumptions. You needed to believe I was a failure so you could feel superior. I used your massive ego as a brilliant shield. While you were busy taking out fraudulent loans to pay for Chloe and her luxury wedding, I was quietly acquiring prime real estate. While Preston was desperately stealing money from his own wife to buy expensive cars and pretend he was a business mogul, I was buying up the private equity firms that held his debt. You completely underestimated me. And that underestimation is exactly what gave me the time and the absolute freedom to build an empire capable of crushing yours. The gallery was completely silent again. The church aunts who had slashed my tires and gossiped about my mental health were now staring at me with a mixture of profound awe and deep, terrified shame. They realized they had aligned themselves with a bankrupt fraud and openly attacked a self-made billionaire. I turned away from my ruined father and walked slowly toward the plaintiff table. Vance, the aggressive corporate lawyer who had tried to mentally destroy me during the deposition, was sitting rigidly in his leather chair. He was clutching his pen so tightly it looked like it might snap in his hands. I stopped right in front of his table. I looked down at him, noting the heavy beads of sweat forming on his forehead. Mr. Vance, I said, my voice dropping to a low, deadly register. You pride yourself on being the absolute best corporate attorney at Sterling and Partners. You charge exorbitant fees to ruthlessly destroy people you consider weak and defenseless. Vance swallowed hard, refusing to make direct eye contact with me. He just stared at the polished mahogany table. You really should have done a basic background check on the holding company that currently owns the commercial building your prestigious law firm operates in, I said, tilting my head slightly. You should have checked the primary leaseholder agreements before you tried to drag me into this courtroom and declare me mentally incompetent. Vance squeezed his eyes shut. His chest he heaved with a deep, shaky breath. I looked over at my father, who was watching this interaction with wide, panicked eyes. Tell him, Vance, I commanded, my voice echoing loudly in the tense room. Tell your arrogant client exactly who owns the massive high-rise building your law firm operates in. Tell him who your ultimate landlord is. Vance slowly opened his eyes. He looked up at my father, his face completely devoid of any remaining professional pride. He looked like a man who was walking to his own execution. He cleared his throat, but his voice was barely a rough whisper. She does. Vance whispered, his voice trembling violently. Maya owns the building, Marcus. She owns the entire property. The collective gasp from the courtroom gallery was deafening. My father physically stumbled backward in the witness box. He hit the heavy wooden backboard and slumped against it. His entire world, his fake wealth, his absolute control, his legal strategy had just been completely obliterated by a single sentence. He was not just bankrupt. He was completely at the absolute mercy of the daughter he had spent his entire life trying to destroy. I looked at Vance and offered him a slow, terrifying smile. Your lease agreement is officially up for renewal next month, Mr. Vance, I said quietly. I highly recommend you start packing your boxes today. I do not renew contracts with lawyers who attempt to forge medical records. Vance dropped his pen. It clattered loudly against the table. I turned my back on him and looked up at Judge Harrison, who was watching the entire exchange with a look of deep, absolute satisfaction. The trap had not just closed, it had completely crushed every single bone in their collective bodies. Vance dropped his pen. It clattered loudly against the table. I turned my back on him and looked up at Judge Harrison, who was watching the entire exchange with a look of deep, absolute satisfaction. The trap had not just closed, it had completely crushed every single bone in their collective bodies. But I was not done yet. They had tried to take my freedom and my sanity. Merely exposing their bankruptcy was not a sufficient penalty for that level of malicious intent. I returned to the defense table and gave Sarah a brief, sharp nod. Sarah immediately picked up a small, sleek digital audio player from her briefcase. Your Honor. The defense has one final piece of evidence to submit regarding the immediate character and the absolute fraudulent intent of the individuals bringing this conservatorship petition. Sarah announced, holding the small device up. We request permission to play a brief audio recording captured legally at my client and her primary residence just 3 nights ago. Vance did not even bother to object. He was physically deflated, staring blankly at the wall behind the judge. My father, Marcus, however, snapped out of his shock. He gripped the edge of the witness box, staring at the small digital player with a sudden rising panic. He did not know what was on the recording, but he knew it was going to be completely devastating. "Permission granted," Judge Harrison said, leaning forward with intense interest. "Proceed, counselor." Sarah connected the small device to the courtroom audio system. She pressed a single button. A sharp crackle of static filled the heavy silence, followed immediately by the undeniable sound of heavy rain hitting a wooden porch. And then Preston and his frantic, desperate voice echoed loudly through the entire courtroom. "I know I messed up, Maya," the recorded voice of Preston pleaded, sounding absolutely pathetic. "I am in serious financial trouble. My primary business line of credit was just bought out. They are demanding a $1.2 million repayment. If I do not get them cash by tomorrow, my firm will be completely bankrupt. Chloe will leave me. Your father will literally kill me." In the gallery, Chloe gasped loudly. She turned to stare at Preston, who was physically shrinking into the wooden pew, his face completely hidden behind his trembling hands. The recording continued playing mercilessly. "I just need you to take out a fast cash equity loan for $200,000. Preston begged on the tape. "Just give me the cash. I will pay you back double. I will make all of this go away for you right now." My father, Marcus, stood absolutely rigid in the witness box. His jaw clenched so tightly I thought his teeth might actually shatter. He was listening to his golden son-in-law, the man he had trusted over his own flesh and blood, completely groveling for money from the daughter he actively despised. Then came the final lethal blow. The audio recording captured Preston offering his ultimate betrayal. "If you give me the $200,000, I will personally sabotage the entire conservatorship case." Preston offered, his recorded voice dripping with absolute cowardly desperation. "I have direct administrative access to the Sterling and Partners legal portal. I can easily forge your father and his digital signature on a formal withdrawal petition. I will cancel the entire lawsuit tomorrow morning. Your father will not even know until it is completely processed. I will get him off your back forever, Maya. Just give me the money." "Me?" Sarah pressed the button again, abruptly stopping the playback. The silence that followed was heavy, toxic, and incredibly volatile. Chloe was the first to completely snap. She lunged across the wooden pew, grabbing Preston by his expensive suit collar. "You lying, pathetic coward!" Chloe screamed, her voice tearing through the quiet courtroom like a jagged knife. "You were going to betray my father. You dragged me into this mess. You humiliated me. You stole my money, and now you are begging her for cash." Preston tried to push her away, but Chloe was completely unhinged. She slapped him hard across the face, the sharp cracking sound echoing loudly. A heavy-set bailiff immediately rushed into the gallery, grabbing Chloe by her arms and forcefully dragging her away from her completely broken husband. She continued to scream and thrash wildly, her perfect blonde hair completely ruined, her mascara running down her flushed cheeks. My father, Marcus, did not yell. He did not move to help his daughter. He just stared at Preston with a look of pure, cold, absolute murder. The realization of the double betrayal hit him with staggering force. He had funded this entire aggressive lawsuit. He had ruined his own public reputation on the radio. He had risked everything to steal my house, all based on the absolute assurance from Preston that it was a foolproof legal strategy. And the entire time, Preston was actively plotting to forge his signature and throw him directly under the legal bus just to save his own failing business. Sarah did not give them a single moment to recover from the shock. She walked swiftly back to our table and pulled one final document from the heavy black binder. She marched up to the judge and handed it directly to him. Your Honor, the audio recording clearly demonstrates the sheer absolute desperation of Mr. Preston. Sarah stated, her voice ringing with absolute finality. But this final document completely explains the true source of that desperation. Judge Harrison took the paper. He adjusted his glasses again, reading the highlighted sections rapidly. His expression hardened into a mask of pure judicial fury. Sarah turned to face my father, who was still trapped in the witness box. Mr. Marcus, you testified that you have spent 30 years building a spotless corporate legacy. Sarah said, her voice dripping with lethal sarcasm. I highly suggest you check your personal retirement accounts when you leave this courtroom today. My father blinked, his eyes darting frantically towards Sarah. What are you talking about? He rasped. Because according to the verified offshore trace we just handed to the judge. Sarah continued, stepping closer to the witness box so my father could hear every single devastating syllable. Your son-in-law Preston did not just steal from his wife and her private trust fund. He systematically embezzled over $500,000 directly from your personal corporate retirement accounts over the last 18 months to artificially float his own failing real estate firm. My father, Marcus, physically collapsed. His knees completely buckled beneath him. He hit the wooden floor of the witness box hard, his hands gripping the railing desperately to keep from falling completely flat. He let out a low, agonizing sound that was half gasp and half sob. He was completely broke. His firm was under federal audit. His daughter despised him. And the son-in-law he had championed had actively robbed him entirely blind. He had absolutely nothing left. He was a completely ruined man. Judge Harrison did not offer a single ounce of sympathy for the pathetic man, sobbing on the floor of the witness box. He picked up his wooden gavel and slammed it down with such tremendous force that the sound echoed like a gunshot through the massive room. I am officially dismissing this emergency conservatorship petition with extreme prejudice. Judge Harrison declared, his voice radiating pure disgust. This court has been subjected to a malicious, coordinated attempt to weaponize the legal system for blatant financial theft. Mr. Marcus, you have committed a profound abuse of the judicial process. You attempted to strip a highly capable, successful woman of her basic human rights to cover up your own catastrophic financial failures. Sarah stood up and addressed the court, smoothing her perfectly tailored navy blue suit. Your Honor, the defense formally requests that all legal fees associated with this fraudulent petition be immediately assigned to the plaintiff. We will be submitting our finalized invoice to the court clerk immediately following this session. Judge Harrison nodded firmly, his expression stern. The request is absolutely granted. The plaintiff is hereby ordered to pay every single cent of the defense and their legal fees. And considering you hired a premium New York City corporate litigation partner, I sincerely doubt those fees will be cheap. I am also forwarding the financial documents submitted today directly to the district attorney and the federal tax authorities. We are officially adjourned. The judge stood up and exited the courtroom, leaving a heavy, devastating silence in his wake. Vance packed his expensive leather briefcase with frantic, jerky movements. He did not say a single word to his arrogant client. He practically sprinted down the center aisle, pushing past the lingering church members who were eagerly whispering about the incredible scandal they had just witnessed. Vance knew his legal career was effectively over. My father slowly pulled himself up from the floor of the witness box. He looked like he had aged 20 years in 20 minutes. His expensive custom suit was wrinkled and stained with his own terrified sweat. He stumbled down the small wooden steps and dragged his heavy feet across the courtroom floor toward my defense table. He looked up at me with red, puffy eyes, completely stripped of the arrogant, patriarchal dominance he had wielded like a weapon his entire life. Maya, please. My father choked out a pathetic, weak sob. He reached his shaking hand across the mahogany table, but he did not dare touch me. Please, you have to help me. I have absolutely nothing left. The federal authorities are going to seize all my remaining accounts. Preston stole my retirement. My business is completely gone. I am begging you, sweetheart. We are family. We are blood. You cannot just leave me to drown like this. I am your father. I slowly packed my digital tablet into my genuine Birkin bag. I did not break eye contact with him. You stopped being my father the day you dumped me at grandmother and her house because I refused to be your quiet, obedient victim. I replied, my voice perfectly steady. You abandoned me when I was a teenager. You refused to co-sign my first lease. You told me I was a terrible investment. You spent my entire adult life trying to tear me down just to make yourself feel taller. You do not get to invoke the word family now just because your fraudulent empire finally collapsed. Suddenly, a loud, hysterical wailing filled the space between us. Chloe stumbled forward from the gallery. Her designer pink dress was heavily wrinkled. Her perfect makeup was completely destroyed by tears, and her hands were trembling violently. She realized that Preston was going to prison. She realized her massive trust fund was completely drained. She realized her father could no longer afford to buy her fake affection. Chloe dropped hard onto her bare knees right in front of my table. The sound of her kneecaps hitting the solid hardwood floor was sharp and pathetic. Aunt Denise and Sister Mary stood in the aisle watching in absolute silent horror as the untouchable golden child completely degraded herself. Maya, I am so sorry, Chloe wailed, grabbing the edge of the table to keep herself upright. I did not know Preston was stealing. I swear to God I did not know. I have absolutely nothing. My car is gone. My credit cards are frozen. My husband is a criminal. You have to forgive me, Maya. Please forgive me. You have so much money. You can fix this. You can help me start over. I am your little sister. I looked down at the golden child kneeling on the floor. For 34 years, she had actively participated in my abuse. She had mocked my clothes, my job, and my life. Just last night, she had thrown a $20 bill at my feet in a crowded upscale restaurant, telling me to enjoy my final meal before they locked me in an insane asylum. Now she was literally begging for my financial mercy. I felt absolutely no pity for either of them. The emotional wounds they had inflicted on me over the decades had fully scarred over, leaving behind a thick, impenetrable armor. I picked up my expensive leather bag and stepped out from behind the defense table. I looked down at my father, who was openly weeping, and my sister, who was sobbing hysterically on her knees. I looked at the two people who had actively conspired to steal the only home I had ever felt safe in. You wanted my house to save your failing company, Marcus, I said, my voice slicing cleanly through their pathetic crying. You tried to legally declare me insane to steal my grandmother and her legacy just to pay off your own fraudulent debts. But you played the wrong game against the wrong opponent. Because now I own your company. Every single share, every single commercial property, and every single outstanding loan. Obsidian Holdings acquired the absolute majority of your toxic assets yesterday morning, and I am liquidating the entire firm tomorrow. The word tomorrow hung in the air like a lethal death sentence. My father let out a guttural cry of absolute defeat. He sank onto the wooden bench, burying his face in his trembling hands, sobbing uncontrollably into his palms. Chloe stopped her pathetic wailing and just stared at me with wide, terrified eyes. She finally realized that all the vicious insults and all the cruel jokes she had thrown at me for decades had a massive, undeniable price tag. And the bill was finally due. Before anyone could say another word, the heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom swung open with a loud, echoing thud. Everyone in the gallery turned around in shock. Two uniformed police officers and one plainclothes detective walked purposefully down the center aisle. They bypassed my table completely and marched directly toward the gallery pew where Preston was still slumped over in a state of catatonic dread. Preston, stand up. The plainclothes detective commanded, his voice leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. We have a warrant for your immediate arrest. Preston slowly lifted his head. His expensive blonde hair was a complete mess, and his pale face was covered in a thick layer of terrified sweat. Arrest for what? He mumbled weakly. I did not do anything wrong. I was just trying to save my business. You are being formally charged with multiple counts of felony corporate embezzlement, wire fraud, and perjury. The detective stated flatly, grabbing Preston by his expensive suit jacket and pulling him roughly to his feet. Turn around and put your hands behind your back. Preston began to sob loudly. He looked frantically over at my father. Marcus, please help me. Preston begged, his voice cracking in sheer panic. Call your lawyers. Call Vance. You have to bail me out. My father did not even look at him. My father just stayed on the wooden bench, weeping for his own lost empire. Vance was already halfway down the street, running from the disaster. Preston then turned his desperate, pleading eyes toward his wife. Baby, please call the bank, Preston cried as the cold steel handcuffs clicked tightly around his wrists. Get the emergency funds. Do not let them take me to jail. Chloe slowly stood up from the floor. She looked at the man she had married solely for his wealth and his supposed social status. She looked at the heavy metal handcuffs and the stern police officers. Then she looked down at her own shaking hands. She was tightly clutching her expensive designer handbag, but it was completely empty. Her credit cards were frozen. Her private trust fund was entirely drained. Her luxury car had been repossessed in front of all her wealthy friends. She had absolutely no money and no husband. She was a complete social pariah. Do not ever speak to me again. Chloe whispered venomously, stepping away from Preston as if he were a diseased animal. I am filing for divorce the second I leave this building. The police officers did not care about their petty marital drama. They physically pushed Preston forward, marching him out of the courtroom. His pathetic sobbing echoed down the marble hallway until the heavy doors swung shut behind him. Chloe was left standing entirely alone in the aisle, holding her empty bag. She looked desperately toward Aunt Denise and Sister Mary, hoping for some shred of comfort or validation. But the church women actively turned their backs on her, whispering fiercely among themselves about the immense shame the family had brought to the community. Chloe was completely isolated. She had built her entire identity on being better than me, and now she had absolutely nothing left. I picked up my genuine Birkin bag and turned my back on the pathetic ruins of my former family. I began walking slowly down the center aisle, my head held high and my posture perfectly straight. The expensive Italian wool of my custom suit brushed against the wooden pews. Every single person in the gallery actively avoided my gaze. They were absolutely terrified of the quiet, immense power I had just displayed. Maya, wait. A desperate voice rasped behind me. I heard the heavy, frantic scrambling of footsteps. My father had pulled himself up and was rushing down the aisle after me. He lunged forward, reaching out to grab my arm to physically force me to listen to his pathetic apologies. He still thought he could exert some tiny fraction of physical control over me. He was completely wrong. Before his sweating hand could even touch the fabric of my sleeve, I smoothly stepped to the side and completely deflected his grasp. He stumbled awkwardly forward, almost tripping over his own expensive leather shoes. I turned to face him, my expression completely locked in cold, absolute detachment. Do not ever try to touch me again, Marcus, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, lethal whisper that made him physically recoil. Maya, please. My father begged, tears streaming freely down his wrinkled face. You cannot do this to us. You cannot take the company. It is our family legacy. It is everything I have ever worked for. What about your grandmother? She would not want you to destroy her own son. She left you that house to keep the family together. I looked at the pathetic, broken man standing in front of me. I felt a deep, profound sense of closure wash over my entire soul. You are entirely wrong, Marcus, I replied, keeping my voice perfectly steady and loud enough for the gossiping church members to hear every single word. Grandmother did not leave me that house to keep this toxic family together. She left me that house because she knew it was the only place I was ever truly safe from your abuse. The only thing Grandma left me was the truth about who you people really are, and I just made it public. My father opened his mouth to argue, but no sound came out. His shoulders slumped completely forward. He realized in that exact moment that there was absolutely no coming back from this. He could not manipulate me. He could not intimidate me. He could not lie his way out of the massive financial grave he had dug for himself. He was completely and utterly defeated. I turned away from him for the absolute final time. I pushed open the heavy wooden doors of the courtroom and stepped out into the main corridor. I did not look back. I walked confidently through the building and pushed through the front glass exit doors. The bright, warm Atlanta sunlight hit my face instantly. The oppressive, heavy air of the courthouse was gone completely, replaced by the fresh, crisp air of absolute freedom. I took a deep, cleansing breath. A sleek black Maybach was idling quietly at the curb, right in front of the courthouse steps. The tinted windows rolled down, and my lead investigator, Julian, stepped out from the driver's seat, wearing a sharp professional suit. He quickly walked around the luxury vehicle and opened the back door for me. "Everything went exactly as planned, boss," Julian said, offering a rare, genuine, respectful smile. "The liquidation orders have already been filed and processed." I smiled back at him, feeling the heavy burden of the last 34 years finally lift off my shoulders completely. I stepped into the plush, luxurious interior of the waiting Maybach and settled into the soft leather seat. "Where to, boss?" Julian asked, closing the heavy door and sliding into the driver's seat. He looked at me through the rearview mirror, waiting for his next command. I looked out the tinted window at the massive, imposing courthouse building. My father, my sister, and my brother-in-law were still trapped inside, completely annihilated by their own massive greed and endless arrogance. They had tried to bury me, but they did not realize I was the seed. "Home, Julian," I said softly, leaning back against the leather headrest. "Take me home." The powerful engine of the Maybach purred to life. The luxury car pulled smoothly away from the curb, merging seamlessly into the busy city traffic. I was finally returning to my grandmother and her beautiful house, not as a broken victim, but as the absolute master of my own incredible destiny. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. If you have ever had to walk away from a toxic family environment to protect your own peace and build your own success, please let me know in the comments below. Do not forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories of overcoming the odds. Remember that your true worth is never defined by the people who cannot see your value. Stay strong, stay focused, and always protect your peace. Have a wonderful day. The story of Maya reveals a profound truth about dealing with toxic family dynamics. The absolute most powerful lesson woven through her challenging journey is that being underestimated by toxic people is never a curse, but a hidden strategic advantage. For many years, Maya endured the harsh judgment and cruel assumptions of her father and her sister. They constantly labeled her a complete failure and projected their own deep insecurities directly onto her. Instead of wasting her precious energy trying to scream her worth to people completely committed to misunderstanding her, she embraced the quiet silence. She brilliantly used their massive egos and blind arrogance as a heavy protective shield. While they were busy performing for high society and drowning in their own fraudulent lies, she was in the dark shadows doing the actual hard work. She built an undeniable financial empire because she simply did not need their validation to recognize her own inherent value. This teaches us a highly vital lesson about strict boundaries and absolute self-worth. When you are surrounded by people who actively try to tear you down, the most devastating revenge is simply your own monumental silent success. You absolutely do not owe toxic family members an explanation of your personal life choices. You do not ever have to participate in their chaotic manufactured drama. By maintaining complete emotional detachment and focusing entirely on your own personal growth, you completely strip them of their false power over you. Maya proved beautifully that your destiny is never defined by the broken people who cannot see your true worth. You are the sole architect of your future. Let their foolish underestimation be the quiet fuel that drives you forward. Take a moment today to evaluate the toxic voices in your own life and bravely step away from their noise to start building your own quiet empire.